Hey everyone, welcome to Stat Chasing Week 7. If this is your first time listening to the show, this is where I go through all the stats that I find really important to help me get a sense of what happened this past week and really sets my foundation for the week in pretty much everything fantasy, whether I'm looking to make dynasty trades, set my lineups, set my DFS lineups, whatever it is, kind of helps be the foundation. And I think once I have an understanding of these types of opportunity-based stats, then I'm able to better incorporate all the other great analysis that comes out as the week goes on. So the stats that I'm going to be looking at here, just to quickly run through, from PFF, I like to look at yards per route run and targets per route run. Targets per route run, I think, is especially useful for tight ends. I also look at dropbacks and routes run per dropback. That, to give us a sense of how big a guy's role is, how often they're out there on the field as a receiver. I also this week am going to be mentioning some of PFF's running back stats, elusive rating, and breakaway percentage. We have a little bit of a sample now, and so I added some additional running back context where I thought it was interesting there. At RotoViz, I get air yards and target share stats. That includes Josh Hermsmeyer's Whopper metric, which is a combination of target share and air yard share, tilted towards target share. That's especially useful for wide receivers. Really gives you a sense of kind of the value of the target profile that a wide receiver's seen. Another way to get a sense of that is average depth of target. So how deep downfield on average a receiver is being targeted really gives you a sense of how they're being deployed. And that tends to be pretty sticky in terms of the type of role that a receiver's in. RotoViz also has expected points, which weight opportunities, carries, targets by the line of scrimmage. I think that's especially useful to look at for running backs, where a running back is getting a carry is extremely important. To that point, I'll use the term green zone, which comes from Ben Gretch's work on stealing signals. That's a term for a touch, or the green zone is the part of the field within the 10-yard line on, and a touch there or a target there would be a high value target or a high value carry or high value touch. So all that comes from Ben Gretch. I also was looking this week at some of Hayden Winks's work on situational running back touches. Hayden breaks down, that comes from RotoWorld, and he breaks down like the passing down situational touches that running backs are getting, third downs, etc. So that I dove into. I'll give you one guess what player had me going to look at that. I needed to do a little more Rojo analysis, so dug into that. But I think I mentioned it a few times throughout. Oh, my Brooklyn Sirens going here. Can you hear that? A couple shout outs here. At Change College has been doing timestamps for each team for these YouTube videos. I've been including those on the podcast as well. They're maybe off by a few seconds on the pod, but it's been awesome to have. So thank you to At Change College has been doing that. Also, a big shout out to Sam Hoppin, who's been creating charts for each team, and I'll pull that up now. That has been really helpful in giving a visual component to the YouTube show. And I'll just run through this quickly because I don't want to overly talk about the charts for anyone listening on the podcast, but you can see here on the x-axis, we have targets per route. So we want players over to the right. They're getting targeted at a very high percentage per the amount of routes they're running. And then on the y-axis, routes per dropback. So guys who are going to be out there 100% of the time, like DeAndre Hopkins was this week, then they'll be right up at the top of the chart. Guys who are kind of more bit players like Darrell Daniels, Dan Arnold, they're going to be further down here. We want ideally guys to show up where DeAndre Hopkins always does, right in this section of the chart, this top right quadrant here. That's the spot to be in. If you're not there, where Christian Kirk isn't too bad, still getting targeted at a decently high rate and running a lot of routes. You really want to not be out there all the time, but not running many routes. That's, the kind of that doing cardio type of role. like we see with guys like Chris Hogan. Don't want guys in that range. That tends to be pretty low value roles. And then if you're not running routes all the time, it's great to see guys who are like what Chase Edmonds is a good example. Chase Edmonds probably going to be running more routes now with Kenyon Drake out. But tight ends, wide receivers who are in potential spots to increase their role, but are getting targeted at a really high rate. That shows you a lot of upside. If they can get on the field more and they're getting targeted at a high rate with the amount of work that they are getting, then that can be pretty exciting when opportunities break their way. So that will be the setup for the chart for each team. There's one more component with the size of the bubble here representing the air yard share. So again, DeAndre Hopkins is what we're looking for. He's getting targeted at a high rate. He's out there all the time. And he has a massive share of the air yards, 40.9% this week. So I was like, I go by alphabetically through the teams. It's always nice that the Arizona chart comes up first because DeAndre Hopkins is just kind of the perfect example of what we're looking for. But yeah, I'll get into it here with Arizona, and let's start with the backfield. So Kenyon Drake here carted off with an ankle injury. The x-rays were negative, but it does look like he could be out for a while. Chase Edmonds played 61% of snaps to Drake's 40%, which I think was actually more of a result of the game script than the injury, with Drake not being hurt until late in the fourth quarter. Of course, it did go to overtime, but I think that, we predicted on the show last week, I mentioned that Drake was in the perfect game script against Dallas, and Seattle set up like a Chase Edmonds game, and we saw that. I think now with Arizona, Edmonds in these types of Seattle environments isn't going to be ceding the same amount of carries to Drake, and he could really smash in the right spots. So Edmonds now is pretty exciting. He had 5 carries in this game to Drake's 14, but 7 targets to Drake's 2. So he has the potential to lock up a lot more of the carry volume in this offense, but he's got such a strong receiving role that, if you add 10 carries to what Edmonds is doing and another target, that's a big addition. Hopefully that will come with some high value touches there by the end zone, and he can get into the end zone a little bit more. Drake, meanwhile, I guess we don't really need to kick Drake while he's down, but this is a game where he only had 2 targets. It was very disappointing for Drake that when they get into this game script, it really is going to be a Chase Edmonds type of game, even if Drake comes back healthy soon. For Drake just to have 2 targets in this game when it was incredibly high scoring, fast paced, went to overtime. Of course, he went out before overtime, but the Cardinals never led in this game until they kicked the game-winning field goal. So this was an opportunity for Drake to show that he can be used in the passing game, and he really flopped. Edmonds is looking pretty strong, as I mentioned. He had 9.3 receiving expected points in this game, only 2.2 rushing expected points. His maximum rushing expected points this season was in week 4 with 4.6. So there is downside here if, Benjamin comes in and takes over some of that Drake role. I think he probably will to an extent. But like I said, Edmonds has such a strong receiving role that he doesn't need to lock up. He doesn't need to become like an every down workhorse type of guy. He can be Aaron Jones in this offense. He can be Alvin Kamara type of role in this offense. This is a high up-tempo, very pass-heavy offense that if you get the running back who gets enough of the receiving work and has enough of the rushing work and has all the receiving work locked up, then he's going to be extremely valuable. Eno Benjamin wasn't active for this role, so didn't get a chance to see what his role will look like. I'm basically expecting him to be a reduced version of Drake. Benjamin does have the profile of a guy who can be a receiving back, but so did Drake for that matter. And so I'm assuming that Benjamin will kind of be more of a rusher than a receiver, but remains to be seen. There's nothing about Benjamin, the player, that says he would be pigeonholed into that role. At wide receiver, DeAndre Hopkins ran a route on 98% of dropbacks. He had an elite whopper of 0.7 with 27% target share, 41% of the air yards, targeted on 22% of his routes. little bit of a deeper ADOT than usual at 13.4, which was interesting. Nice to see that he can kind of be used in different ways. This happened a couple times now where his ADOT has spiked. Typically, it's down below 10. Christian Kirk ran around on 92% of dropbacks. He had an 18% target share, 18% air yard share. He saw a shallower than expected ADOT of 8.6. Sort of switch roles with Hopkins in this game a little bit, although the volume stayed with Hopkins, as it almost always does. Kirk got in the end zone twice, but his Whopper was 0.4 and was actually lower than what he's had on the season. So this wasn't a spike game for Kirk in terms of the volume. The thing with Kirk is that he had run really bad to start the season in terms of the efficiency on top of his volume. Now he's running really hot. But there has not been a fundamental change in his usage that's driving this improvement. It's kind of this like really exacerbated kind of, getting right. He's basically regressed, but now he's regressed so far the other way. So I think that the truth kind of lies somewhere in the middle of where he started and where he's running right now. I think if anyone's buying into this, he's probably a sell. But his beginning of the season was so disappointing that I'm not sure how hot his market will be, but maybe worth shopping him around. He wouldn't be a guy I'd really be looking to buy right now. Andy Isabella saw season high in routes run, which was nice. Ran around on 60% of routes. Still, pretty low to trust, but definitely awesome to see him out there more. He continued to operate as a deep threat with a 13.7 ADOT, only a 7% target share, and a 10% air yard share. So it wasn't great in terms of his actual role within the offense this week. But we know that Andy Isabella can produce if given more of a chance. And we know that guys who are going to have this deeper ADOT role, not only will you be a little bit more variant in terms of your yards per target each week, but sometimes you can see guys just not get, one or two additional targets that really spikes their week. And so the key for Isabella right now is just having him out there more. It's nice to see him set a season high. Would like to see him get a bit higher. If he could get into that 70% range, that's where he'd really start to become interesting, I think. Larry Fitzgerald ran a very dusty route on 87% of dropbacks. He had an ADOT of 4.6, 18% target share in this game, 9% air yard share. Continues to kind of steal just enough to hurt the other wide receivers, not really delivering much value on his own. At tight end, Dan Arnold ran around on just 17% of dropbacks. I think he's either banged up or just getting phased out of the offense. He was targeted on 33% of his routes, which was, pretty good. But this week, his route sample was so small that it doesn't really mean much. On the season, his targets per route run is at just 10.8%. So not buying it for Dan Arnold having, a strong efficiency week. The real thing to take note of here is that his routes run were way down. In Atlanta, Todd Gurley had a strong snap share in this game, 71%, and he had an elite workload in this game of 22.6 expected points. The King of Dust rewarded the Falcons by scoring an accidental touchdown that ended up costing them a game. I'm sure you've seen this replay, right? He's not supposed to score because they can kick a field goal and run the clock completely down and win the game that way, but instead he gets in the end zone, which allows the Lions to drive down the field. They score the game-tying touchdown, kick the game-winning extra point. So really costly mistake by Gurley for the Falcons. But I don't know if it's going to change anything in terms of the pecking order. This was actually a pretty bullish game for Gurley in terms of the volume. Brian Hill played 23% of snaps, and he got a backup level workload of 4.9 expected points. Ito Smith wasn't involved at all, played just 3 snaps. So even if you're hoping for Brian Hill to take over, or if you're a Todd Gurley owner, either way, this was a really bullish development to see Ito Smith phased out in this game. If we can get this down, any backfield that's down to a 2-man backfield is good news, obviously, for those 2 running backs that remain. Gurley does look like okay when I went and looked at PFF's breakaway percentage and elusive rating. He's fine in those metrics, not too bad. even things like Pro Football Reference, you look at broken tackles and that type of thing. He's doing okay there too. So, it's not that he's been terrible really as a rusher. I did listen on the Roto-World podcast. Josh Norris compared him to an oceanic tanker or something. When he's trying to hit the edge, he just can't turn. He can't burst. He's not what he used to be as a player on tape, but he's not also been terrible at his kind of new grinder, power back type of role. So we'll see if his role changes at all. That touchdown that he really shouldn't have scored could sour things for him. We'll see. At wide receiver, Julio Jones ran a route on 91% of dropbacks. He had a 22% target share, a 14% air yard share. Sort of the secondary option this week with a 0.44 whopper. Calvin Ridley ran a route on 95% of dropbacks with an 18% target share and a 62% air yard share. He had a number one wide receiver type of whopper of 0.69. On the season, Ridley has a 0.63 whopper to Jones's 0.44. Do have to account for the fact that Jones missed that entire second half of the game, so that's bringing his whopper down a bit. But Ridley still looks like the better bet for weekly volume, even factoring that in. Jones does have the higher yards per route run, though, 2.6 to 2.29. But both these guys are elite. Obviously, no need to overthink this. I would break ties in favor of Ridley right now, but, not something to get overly picky about who the wide receiver 1, the wide receiver 2 is. Ben Gretsch had a really good thread, kind of a nice thread/rant on Twitter about like us focusing too much on the wide receiver 1 versus wide receiver 2 battle. And there's a couple instances of this that I'll get to in the show. DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf. I think that's what spurred Ben to go on his rant. But I agree. I mean, I think the important thing is if a guy is getting elite volume, and both of these wide receivers getting elite volume. So don't need to be too concerned. Like I said, if I'm breaking ties right now, it's to Ridley. Russell Gage left with a knee injury in this game. He did return later on. As a result, he just ended up running around on 45% of dropbacks. Brandon Powell appears to be Gage's direct backup. Powell ran a route on 43% of dropbacks. So just something to note. Obviously, we know Zacchaeus is going to take over on the outside when one of those guys goes down. But if Gage were to go down for a while, it'd probably be Powell based on this week. Powell, though, had an 11% targets per route run, which is really bad. So maybe this doesn't matter. Gage had a target per route run of 35%, which is really good. I think Gage is a little bit underrated when everyone is healthy. I don't know what his ceiling is exactly. So, how to use that information is tough. Maybe kind of a cheap bring back if you're stacking games with the Falcons. But obviously you're giving up a lot to not have Ridley or Julio there. So I don't know, but it does seem like he can get open when the primary coverage is focused elsewhere. And I think he is the third option in this offense, not Hayden Hurst. Hayden Hurst did have a decent game in the box score here with 6 for 68. He ran a route on 82% of dropbacks, and he had targets per route run of 19%, which isn't terrible. It's not great. I would say it's good, not great. But fairly shallow ADOT here of 6.7. I do think that Hurst really needs to get in the end zone to have any kind of true spike week. He's not getting targeted at a high enough rate to where he's going to be all that strong. But, for him to be able to get 6 for 68 is pretty nice. Probably helped a little bit by Gage leaving and then Powell coming out, who really struggled to earn any kind of targets. In Buffalo, at running back, week 6 saw Devin Singletary clearly ahead of Zach Moss. He had 3/4 of the snaps in week 6, but this week it was basically an even split. We have 54% of the snaps to Singletary this week, 47% to Moss. Singletary had a slightly clearer edge in the receiving game. He had 5 targets to Moss's 3. And then the expected points are kind of in the middle, with Singletary having 11.3 to Moss's 8.5. Moss performed better adding 1.7 points to his workload, while Singletary ended up leaving 4.6 points on the field in this game. Both backs looking like flex options going forward. It'll be interesting to see if this efficiency can continue, because if so, then Moss could end up making a move on Singletary's role to some extent and kind of flip this backfield a little bit. Singletary obviously not going to lose his role entirely, but we could see the committee swing toward Moss's way if Singletary doesn't start to be a bit more efficient. Leaving 4.6 on the field is quite a bit. At wide receiver, Stephon Diggs ran a route on 100% of dropbacks. He had a 27% target share, 34% air yard share, an ADOT of 9.2, a whopper of 0.64, which is a wide receiver one type of day. Just 6 for 48 in the box score, but he had 11 targets. He had 101 air yards. He's still locked in as an elite wide receiver one. You can see him here on the chart in that DeAndre Hopkins zone, exactly where I want to see guys. Gabriel Davis ran a route on 98% of dropbacks. He was targeted on just 6% of his routes, though. I do a podcast with Mike Leone called Establish the Edge, and we were talking about, in sort of a dynasty conversation, guys who can end up being the next J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. And there aren't too many guys in this class that I'm not concerned about. That includes Davis, but I threw out some names of guys who could potentially be that. And Davis is one of the guys that I mentioned. And I don't think that's going to happen, because I'm actually feeling still somewhat bullish on Davis with just how quickly he was able to get on the field as a fourth-round pick. I think that's been really impressive. But he is struggling to earn targets this year. And that's exactly what we saw with Arcega-Whiteside, where he was out there a lot and then just could not get targeted. So, he's kind of right now, he's looking more like a John Hightower, who is also able this year to get a lot of playing time so far, but hasn't really done anything, than a guy like Darnell Mooney, who's gotten on the field and then has been getting targeted more and more each week. So no need to panic on Gabriel Davis, but, if you wanted to use him as kind of a sweetener in a dynasty trade that you're trying to get done, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I do think that he does have a ceiling down the line, not someone to just give up on, because John Brown, they can move on from him after the year. And if we see Davis spike his targets to close the year and then Brown leaves, Davis is someone that's going to be very exciting entering next season and very trendy. But do want to just kind of talk about the floor case here for Davis, because this week is one of the weeks that makes you think about it. Cole Beasley ran a route on 92% of dropbacks. That's really high for a slot wide receiver. So we talk about Diggs is out there for 100% of routes, Beasley's out there for 92% of routes, and Davis is out there for 98% of dropbacks. So this means that the Bills basically were never passing out of less than a 3 wide receiver set. It's pretty interesting and makes Beasley somewhat interesting, because he had a 2.55 yards per route run in this game. Very strong volume of a 29% target share, 25% air yard share, 0.61 whopper. And so he's got that strong volume, strong efficiency. On the season, he has a yards per route run of 2.32, which is an elite yards per route run. He has a whopper of 0.41, which is solid. So, it's not a fun play or start to rely on Cole Beasley, but I think there's worse options out there. Maybe, potentially sneaky bring back type of guy with Bills, if you're stacking up a Bills game. At tight end, Tyler Kroft ran a route on 85% of routes, which is pretty strong, but targeted on just 10% of routes. He has a targets per route run of 12% on the season. A decent game in the box score in this one, but he's an uninspiring option, even if Dawson Knox ends up missing more time in the future. In Carolina, Mike Davis saw his snap share decline in this game to 72%. That's down from 88% in week 5 and 88% in week 5 and 83% in week 6. So this is probably due to game environment. We saw in week 4, his snaps were at 71% in a high-scoring game. Trenton Cannon was at just 7% this week, which was also down from last week. So nothing to worry about too much. in that regard. Davis had 10.1 expected points in this game. Not very strong, but that was enough for 83% of the workload in this game. I think this is, probably still a one running back system, although it remains to be seen. There's reports that Mike Davis is still going to play when McCaffrey comes back. There are also, it's not completely out of the question that McCaffrey plays on Thursday. It seems unlikely, but the reports, he's shed his non-contact jersey, so he could maybe play. You'll probably know by the time you're listening to this more than I do now, but I'm guessing that when McCaffrey comes back, Davis does continue to play, at least for a time. I think ultimately McCaffrey's going to get his McCaffrey role back, but they may ease McCaffrey back in. That would just kind of be logical, given what Davis has shown in his ability to carry the workload. At wide receiver, Robbie Anderson ran around on 94% of dropbacks. He had a 30% target share, a 58% air yard share, which is obviously huge, and an elite 0.5 whopper. Anderson's ADOT stayed high this week at 13.4, but he also combined it with an elite target share. So, that's even better. If the ADOT goes higher and he's still getting targeted at a super high rate, that's going to lead to a ton of value. Robbie Anderson owners really have something here. He looks great. He's in an awesome position, just getting great volume. And I think it helps Anderson that DJ Moore is so good, because no team can focus on just taking Robbie Anderson away, because then you get hit with DJ Moore. DJ Moore in this game ran around on 97% of dropbacks. He had a 19% target share, a 35% air yard share, a 0.53 whopper. That's a really strong game. He had just this awesome touchdown that I'm sure you saw. Did play second fiddle to Anderson in this game, but a really strong outing, and continues to. He kind of went back to getting some of those deeper targets, but Anderson didn't come up and get the shallow stuff. Both guys were operating deeper this week, so they can move these guys around as needed. Curtis Samuel was back in this game. He had a great game after not being active the previous week. Ran around on 55% of dropbacks, but still had 22% of the targets while just being out there a little more than half the time. Had a yards per route run of 2.82. Does need to get on the field more before he can really be trusted in lineups, but interesting to see Samuel out there. Interesting to see him so effective after having missed a week, and did get a rushing score as well. At tight end, Ian Thomas ran around on 74% of dropbacks, but targeted on just 4% of those routes. He has a targets per route run of 5.7% on the season on a big sample of routes, 193. Ian Thomas is just a complete afterthought. He belongs on waiver wires, I would say, in all formats. It's gross. He has 11 total targets this season on 193 routes. So that's why it doesn't matter, right? Is it Anderson? Is it Moore? They can switch back and forth in their target shares and their ADOTs in their air shares week to week, or one of the guys can have a solid lead every week, but both guys can still be super valuable because we don't have anyone stealing a ton of volume. Even Curtis Samuel had this really strong week. Week was only out there for 55% of the dropbacks. So yeah, the tight end room is completely barren and not drawing away any of that value, which is really helping Moore and Anderson. In Chicago, David Montgomery ranks 7th in elusive rating, and that's 7th in elusive rating for the season, but he is running back 32 out of 35 qualifying running backs in rushes over 15 yards. So that's this breakaway percentage that PFF has that looks at the percentage of your runs that go over 15 yards. He's running back 32 of 35, but 7th in elusive rating, right? That's like David Montgomery in a nutshell. He can make guys miss, but it's like for 2 extra yards, so it's almost like, what's the point? He's got a very high floor in terms of, a running back, 83% of the snaps this week, a pretty solid workload of 15.1 expected points. but that lack of breakaway ability and this offense overall just gives him a pretty low ceiling, I think. So very kind of high floor, low ceiling type of profile. The stats back it up. The eye backs it up. Yeah, we know what David Montgomery is. By the way, Tariq Cohen is not a free agent after the season. I believe on this show I mentioned that. I know I've said that several times. I think I said it on Establish the Edge as well, but he's not a free agent. He was going to be a free agent, but the Bears extended him in the preseason, which I guess because they're the Bears. He was absolutely terrible last year. Obviously now has this ACL injury. We'll have to see how he looks coming back from that, but he will be coming back from it on the Bears, making Montgomery he's not going to unlock some value next year or kind of consolidate the value that he's showing this year in terms of the getting the total value of the backfield all to himself. I guess you could say that Cohen maybe provides him a little bit of cover coming off of this injury, and that it's less likely that they draft someone. But I think Montgomery right now is, assuming they may have a new GM next year, you would think, and I would imagine that new GM brings in a new running back. At wide receiver, Allen Robinson ran a route on 73% of dropbacks. He left the game with a possible concussion. He had a targets per route run of just 13% in this game. Tough matchup. He was getting most of Jalen Ramsey, but he had a great yards per target of 17.5. So awesome on the work that he did get. On the season, he has a 2.11 yards per route run, which is an elite mark no matter who your quarterbacks are, and he's got some pretty bad quarterback play. So Robinson continues to be an elite wide receiver. He's getting pretty strong volume on the season with a whopper of 0.59. Darnell Mooney ran a route on 89% of dropbacks, 18% target share in this game, a 35% air yard share, a pretty strong whopper, especially for it being Mooney, of 0.52. He's now stepped up and become a major part of the offense. I think this is a spot where a number 2 wide receiver needed to step up. You're kind of looking to see who's gonna take advantage of the fact that Jalen Ramsey is going to be covering Allen Robinson tonight, and it was Darnell Mooney. He's a limited upside type of player. He's a very small wide receiver, and this is not necessarily an offense where we want a ton of pieces of, but his quick rise to relevance in terms of getting on the field and now getting targets when he's on the field, and that's been something we've seen over multiple weeks with him kind of improving his ability to get more and more share of the targets. It's been impressive. It's definitely been impressive beginning of his career for Darnell Mooney. Anthony Miller ran a route on 70% of dropbacks. He had a whopper of 0.3. Miller really looking completely off the fantasy radar. He hasn't had a whopper above 4 since week 2. Not in any individual week. His whopper has not topped 0.4 since week 2, which is not good. At tight end, Jimmy Graham ran a route on 68% of dropbacks, but had a yards per route run of just 1.03. On the season, his yards per route run is at 1.04. That's bad. He really needs a touchdown to deliver value in any given week. Cole Kmet. We got a Cole Kmet sighting. Unfortunately, you see him here down pretty low on the chart. He only ran a route on 27% of dropbacks. He had a 17% targets per route run, which isn't terrible. Not great, but not terrible. He did have a 22.5 yards per target, so hopefully that gets him on the field over, Graham, who's just super dusty. Went over Graham's yards per route run, which is terrible. He's not delivering really anything in efficiency. He's getting targeted okay, but he's doing nothing with those targets. He has scored some touchdowns when he gets them in the red zone, but yeah, would be nice to see Cole Kmet out there a bit more. This is not as an exciting of a game to look at in the numbers I thought it might be for Kmet, because really outside of a couple sightings, he wasn't all that involved. Moving to Cincinnati, at running back, Giovanni Bernard played 76% of snaps. He had an elite workload of 22.3 expected points. Samaje Perine played 25% of the snaps, had just 2 expected points. Travion Williams did not play a snap in this game. Mixon may miss week 8. So if he does, Bernard is looking like a true workhorse. I was a little bit, I had no idea what to expect from Travion Williams. I gave Leone at one point an estimate of what I thought he'd be at, and I said 3 to 30% of snaps. I really had no clue. Whereas I felt pretty strongly that the other similar situation with Jamal Williams, that Dexter Williams would not be involved at all. And here, Travion Williams is a guy they had talked up at points in the offseason. And this would have been a time to really see what you have in Travion Williams. The fact that he didn't even get a single offensive snap, I think is really bearish for him and really bullish for Giovanni Bernard anytime that Mixon is out, whether it's week 8 or later in the season. I did want to mention one thing on Atlanta. Sam pointed out to me there's this really weird play where Ridley was targeted and then it bounced up and I think Hurst caught it. So that contributed to Hurst having a better day than the underlying volume than you would have expected. Forgot to mention that back on Atlanta. But now moving to the wide receivers in Cincinnati, Tyler Boyd ran around on 89% of dropbacks. He had 28% of targets, 22% of the air yards, a whopper of 0.57. Boyd had a 5.8 ADOT this week. Has the most distinct role of these top 3 wide receivers. He's got an ADOT of 8.7 on the season, while both A.J. Green and T. Higgins are above 12. His whoppers at 0.47 on the season, which isn't the highest among these 3, but I do think he's the safest bet on any given week, given that he's getting that lower ADOT role. It's not super, super low. It's not like he's getting targeted like Evan Ingram style, like 4 yards downfield. He's up at 8.7 on the season, but that should help him be the most consistent, the most reliable on any given week. A.J. Green ran a route on 87% of dropbacks. He had a 28% target share, 21% air yard share. I mentioned last week that A.J. Green wasn't dead. He proved that in week 6. He kind of built on that in week 7. After this week, his whopper of 0.51, it leads all Bengals wide receivers. It's still really tough to play him, but do know that he can ruin things for Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins. And also he's really cheap this week on DraftKings. I'm just saying. And he does technically have the biggest volume role in the offense, and he's coming off 2 straight weeks where he's just been heavily involved. T. Higgins ran a route on 79% of dropbacks. He had an 11% target share, a 14% air yard share, a whopper of just 0.26 though. He's at 0.39 on the season. Higgins sees the deepest targets of these 3 guys, and so he's going to have the most inconsistent profile. He did save his day with a touchdown here. As we zoom out, he is having a very strong, although not quite elite thus far, season. His yards per route run is at 1.78. He has a 15% target share, 23% air yard share, a 0.39 whopper on the season. My enthusiasm for him is a little bit tempered after this week, but I definitely remain bullish on him. And I also think that his yards per route run will probably increase over the course of the season because early on in the season, he was out there running routes, but not really involved. And now he's a pretty major part of the offense. If he does cool off at all, then he becomes even more of a dynasty target. You want this guy on your dynasty teams. A.J. Green is a free agent after the year. He was franchise tagged. So T. Higgins is a guy that looks like he can consolidate the role that both he and Green have is kind of the primary deep threat. It can be all him as a sophomore and sets up for just a smash. And he will be very, very trendy if A.J. Green leaves. So if you see any type of buying entry point on Higgins in your dynasty leagues, I recommend snapping that up. At tight end, Drew Sample had a solid game in the box score in this one with 554. He ran a route on 83% of dropbacks, 14% targets per route run. He's at a 12.2% targets per route run on the season, so not really buying this week's production. I think it's likely just a product of the expanded passing production in this game. Moving to Cleveland, Kareem Hunt played 90% of snaps. He had a 16.8 expected points workload, which is good. It's not great, But the thing that's really interesting is that he ceded only half a expected point to D'Ernest Johnson. So it's really about how much value this offense is generating for the backfield, because Hunt just got all of it. So I think, he was not at full health when Nick Chubb went down, right? And we now know that's why we saw any run at all for D'Ernest Johnson. It's because Kareem Hunt's, I believe, ankle at the time was not fully healthy. Now he is fully healthy. He's out there all the time. He's getting all the value of the workload. He does look like an absolute smash in the right game environment. Wasn't quite there for him this week, but I do think it was more about the game environment than anything else. D'Ernest Johnson played a total of 2 offensive snaps in this game. Odell Beckham at wide receiver is done for the season with an ACL tear. Obviously, huge bummer. The injury happened early in the game, so he only ran a route on 3% of dropbacks. The rest of this game can help us determine what's going to happen now going forward a little bit, given that it happened so early in the game. Jarvis Landry ran a route on 86% of dropbacks. He had a 21% target share, an 8% air yard share, an 8 out of just 3.5. I was talking about Tyler Boyd's ADOT, saying it wasn't down there at Evan Ingram down in the 4s. Well, Landry was below that at 3.5. That's not good. That really kind of hurts the upside of a player when they're getting that low of an ADOT. He had a whopper of 0.38. I think he'll probably benefit from OBJ's absence, but I don't know if it'll be a huge boost. I think the thing with Landry is his own health, and he's not out there all the time. He's out there a fair amount. 86% of dropbacks is good, but it would be nice to see him up in the 90s. And I don't know if that's going to happen with him dealing with this rib issue too, on top of the hip surgery coming into the year. Rashard Higgins ran a route on 97% of dropbacks. So yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's where I'd like to see Landry be up at. And Higgins had a 21% target share right there with Landry, tied with him, but Higgins had 35% of the air yards because he was actually targeted downfield. He had a 0.57 whopper in this game and basically took over as the wide receiver 1 this week. It's just 1 week, but he does look like a waiver wire ad. Has the potential to kind of fill in that OBJ role. Donovan Peoples-Jones in this game ran a route on 69% of dropbacks. He had an 11% target share, a 20% air yard share. He had an 8 out of 17.7. So pretty interesting that he's being used that deep downfield. Didn't quite hit for him this week. Didn't quite even get the volume this week. But, I mean, he did get in the end zone. So he will be on people's radar. But I think the ADOT is pretty interesting and shows that he could have some more spike weeks down the line. This guy was a very raw prospect, but extremely strong athleticism. And so is the type of guy that just has a huge range of outcomes. He was a dude that, looked like maybe he would never really become a factor in the NFL at all, but is also the type of guy where if he starts getting interesting, deep threat type of volume, he could really end up delivering and turning into something. So definitely looks like a pretty strong ad in Dynasty right now. Targets are available, and he's emerging in sort of a deep threat role, which is pretty interesting. At tight end, Harrison Bryant balled out in this game. He ran a route on 59% of dropbacks, had a 29% targets per route run, an 18% target share, 11% air yard share on an ADOT of 6. David Njoku, he ran behind Bryant. We were actually told that Bryant would be the starter pregame, so they told us the truth there. That was nice. Njoku ran a route on 41% of dropbacks. He had a good targets per route run of 25%, just not out there as much as Bryant and not quite as strong as Bryant's 29%. Interestingly, though, Njoku was used much deeper downfield with an 8 out of 15 to Bryant's 6. They're kind of used in different roles. All 3 of these Cleveland tight ends now, so obviously Njoku, Bryant, but also Austin Hooper, all 3 of them have been targeted on over 20% of their routes this season. You would think, okay, this is probably just like the system that they're running, or it's something to do with Baker. And I think that's probably true to an extent. I mean, this Cleveland system definitely utilizes the tight end. I think Baker may enjoy throwing to the tight end, but keep in mind that we have 7 tight ends last year that were either in Cleveland with Baker Mayfield or or in Minnesota with Stefanski. And we have 7 of those guys on either team last year who ran 50-plus routes. The only one of those guys to finish with a target per route run of higher than 13% was David Njoku. He had a targets per route run of 19%. So well above that, that 13% that everyone else is kind of down under. So, yeah, I think it has something to do with these 3 players is what I'm getting at. I think all 3 of these tight ends can play. I think they're all good at getting targets. I was skeptical of Austin Hooper's ability to do that entering the year, but I think he's now landed in a better spot to where they're going to pepper the tight end with targets a little bit more. When you see targets per outrun with tight end, I think it has to do with the quarterback. It has to do with the system, but it does also have to do with the player. I'm hoping that David Njoku gets traded because it's bullish to me that he's been able to get a high targets per route run this season in kind of a secondary or tertiary role. And he also had a high targets per route run last season. So I think if he was given a chance to run as someone's number 1 tight end, he might be able to do it. And I hope for his sake and for our sakes that he does get a chance to show if he can. Moving on to Dallas. At quarterback, I don't usually get into quarterbacks, but, Andy Dalton took that real dirty hit. As he was sliding, he will likely be out for week 8 and potentially beyond with this concussion. Hopefully nothing too concerning with him, and he's able to bounce back quickly. 7th round pick, Ben DiNucci filled in. Would really like to see them trade for a quarterback. We'll see. It's not just the quarterbacks, though. It's the offensive line where they've just been really hit with injuries, and they were also just in a terrible matchup, to have all those offensive line injuries this week. You don't really want to be facing Washington if your offensive line is really banged up. So even with Dalton back, maybe this offense starts to look better. Or maybe DiNucci can be serviceable in a better matchup, but would like to see them trade for someone. At running back, Ezekiel Elliott. Let's see. I think I screwed up my notes here. Let's see. No, I didn't. Okay, sorry. Ezekiel Elliott was pulled in this blowout. He's pulled. He didn't have a touch in the 4th quarter. So that explains his 66% of snaps. And, I actually thought when I saw the 66% of snaps, that's actually why I thought I screwed up my notes, because I thought I was looking at last week, because last week he was down at 61%. But he got pulled in the 4th quarter, and so we're now looking at 2 straight games where he hasn't played the full game, although this one not really on Zeke, although he did have a catch bounce off his hands for an interception in this game. So, not quite a fumble, but it was close. Pollard had 9 touches in this game. 6 of them did come before the 3rd quarter. So he does look more involved in this offense than he did before. And I think this is bad. This is bad for Zeke to be losing meaningful snaps when we're seeing this offense tank a little bit. Obviously the value of having the running back in Dallas has been significantly reduced without Dak. Zeke had just 8.3 expected points in this game. That's the kind of value you would expect from like a 1B type of committee running back. But he was, the lead running back getting 8.3 expected points. Tony Pollard had 5.5 expected points. He played on 34% of the snaps. So, yeah, the total value of this backfield was really low. And then both running backs left over 2 points on the field each. They were unable to produce in this bad matchup. So, yeah, nothing really positive to say about the backfield right now. At wide receiver, Amari Cooper ran a route on 75% of dropbacks. He had a 33% target share, 37% air yard share, and a whopper of 0.76. That's pretty great. Pretty great underlying volume. CeeDee Lamb ran a route on 63% of dropbacks, had a 24% target share, 26% air yard share, and a 0.54 whopper, which is good. Definitely good numbers there for Lamb. And then Gallup ran a route on 94% of dropbacks, had a 10% air yard share, 10% target share, an 11% air yard share, and a 0.22 whopper, which is not very good. one interesting note here, Cooper and Lamb both had an 8 out of 8.4, and Gallup was only at 9. So they were all kind of in similar roles this week. Typically, you see Gallup deeper downfield. You can sometimes see Lamb a bit shallower than the other two, but perhaps due to the O-line just not enabling deep targets, you saw Gallup also below 10 this week. And I mentioned Cooper's volume is still very good. That's 0.76 Whopper. That's a wide receiver one, pretty elite Whopper to have. But he's not as safe as that volume would suggest, just given how poor the offense is operating right now. And I think Lamb, so I think kind of this, if you look at this week, you maybe feel a little bit too confident in Cooper, I think. I think this might be a mirage for Cooper a little bit. I'm pretty worried about anyone in this offense. Lamb just didn't produce, so he obviously, everyone's concerned about Lamb going forward. This week does show some bullish signs for Lamb, that 0.54 Whopper. So, I guess relative to the reactions from this week, I would be more concerned about Cooper, less concerned about Lamb, and kind of as concerned as everyone else as Michael Gallup. I mean, Gallup, it was a bad matchup specifically for Gallup. As I mentioned, he's the deep threat in the offense. If the O-line can't protect long enough, then it's going to hurt his ability. But that's going to be a problem going forward, and it's going to be a problem to be Andy Dalton's deep threat. It's probably going to be a problem to be Ben DiNucci's deep threat. I don't know really anything about him, but I assume he doesn't have a rocket arm given that he was drafted in the 7th round. At tight end, Dalton Schultz had a 19% target share. He ran a route on 72% of dropbacks, had a target per route run of 17%. Just had 4 targets and went 2 for 22, though. He's still an option in tight end premium, but it's going to be ugly most weeks. Moving to Denver. Phillip Lindsay was knocked out of this game with a concussion. Melvin Gordon played 60% of snaps and had a solid workload of 14.9 expected points. Considering how poor this game environment was, I think this was pretty encouraging for Melvin Gordon with this usage. 14.9 expected points is pretty solid, and they were getting blown out in this game. I think he could deliver solid value next year for sure if Lindsay misses Week 8's matchup, which is against the Chargers. The one minor red flag here is that Gordon only had 4 targets. This is a game the Broncos trailed the entire way. I wonder if Royce Freeman playing more might actually be a negative in that regard. Royce Freeman played 23% of snaps and had 4.5 expected points, including 2 targets in this game. Lindsay played 18% of snaps. He had 4.4 expected points. He wasn't targeted. Lindsay has had kind of this tradition in the NFL of not really being targeted that much. He's a player that he's been efficient as a receiver. They talked him up as a receiver in preseason. But I don't know. He does, for whatever reason, doesn't tend to get used that much as a receiver. So I do wonder if Freeman, who kind of tends to get overused as a receiver playing more, might end up hurting Gordon. Kind of weird that Gordon didn't get more targets in this game, given that they were trailing the whole time. But Lindsay was the most efficient running back on the day. He had 3.5 points above expectation. Things have not broken right for Lindsay this year, but he is a talented running back. If he was used a little bit more favorably, I'd really like him. My gripe with Lindsay has been mostly pretty much all about his usage and just being worried he wouldn't get enough receptions or be used at the goal line. And that's continued to happen, unfortunately, so far. At wide receiver, Tim Patrick suffered a hamstring injury and will be out a few weeks. He ran a route on 68% of dropbacks in this game. He had a 13% targets per out run. Not a good game for Tim Patrick. And obviously now he's going to be out for a while, but this was a rough outing for everyone on the Broncos. Jerry Jeudy ran a route on 82% of dropbacks. He had an 11% target share, 22% air yard share, and a 0.31 Whopper. This would be a really nice time to see Jeudy step up. Tim Patrick's going to be out, and we could see Jeudy kind of get up from that 0.31 Whopper up to like a 0.5, 0.55 type of Whopper. I think pretty easily. The problem is that he probably needs to step up even beyond that to have all that much value, just given how bad this offense is. If he was running routes with the frequency of a wide receiver one, he'd be on pace for a 0.52 whopper. So, that's why I say I think that's probably the most likely scenarios, that he's up in that point between like 0.5 and 0.55, but would like to see him up as like a true wide receiver one type of whopper, up in the mid sixes, to really deliver value for us, just given how bad this offense is. KJ Hamler ran a route on 41% of dropbacks. His ADOT was surprisingly shallow at 7. Only had a whopper of 0.17. He's not really even a dart throw right now, unless he can get some more volume. At tight end, Noah Fant ran a route on 59% of dropbacks and had a targets per route run of 23%. Albert Okwebunam ran a route on 41% of dropbacks and had a 39% targets per route run, which is gigantic. And then Nick Vannett had a target per route run of 33%, ran a route on 20% of dropbacks. Vannett is the blocking tight end, and he's probably not going to go away. So he won't run a ton of routes on any given week, but he will run some, and he's not going to cede his snaps to one of these other tight ends, most likely, because he is the blocking tight end. And I think that could create a problem, because Okwebunam looks pretty good. 39% target per route run is huge. Only ran around on 41% of dropbacks. Fant was clearly working back in this game. He was not fully healthy. That was obvious from watching the game. And so I think that his lower percentage of route run per dropback was mostly driven by his health and not so much by Okwebunam. But then Okwebunam jumped on that opportunity and had an awesome game. So it's hard to know how to expect this going forward. My lean is that Fant ends up getting his job back, and he's kind of out there as much as we're used to seeing him from the beginning of the season. That's sort of tended to be how things go in the NFL, where the veteran will get his job back. Of course, Fant only a second-year player, but I still lean that way. We'll see. Okwebunam can definitely play, though, and if Fant were to go down, he would be really, really interesting. So, even as kind of a stash right now, in the FFPC football guys main event type leagues, like, I don't hate it. I'm sure we're probably going to pick him up in ship taking with Davis, because Davis loves him, and that's okay. I think that's fine. And in Dynasty, yeah, you should definitely be adding him if you haven't already. Moving to the Lions. DeAndre Swift played 45% of snaps and had 13.7 expected points. Adrian Peterson had 31% of snaps and had 6.5 expected points. And then Kerrane Johnson played 23% of snaps and had 0 expected points. It does look like Johnson's getting phased out of the offense, which is good, but I wish they'd just complete the job and give his snaps to Swift. Kind of a shame that Swift only had 45% here, and Johnson had these 23% extra snaps. Swift is, he's trending in the right direction. 13.7 expected points to Peterson's 6.5. That's really nice. Clear lead in snaps. That's really nice. He was in like a 3-way split last week. He led slightly in snaps last week. Now a much clearer lead in snaps. That's all good. And I think with Swift, we don't need to see too much more before he can start to be kind of a stud running back, because he has the type of role where he's, like, you can think of Adrian Peterson as kind of a Latavius Murray to Swift's potential Alvin Kamara, where we can deal with Peterson being involved somewhat. It's not that Swift needs to get to the point where he's got all the snaps, because he gets the receiving work and he's mixed in at the goal line. If that's the case, then Peterson can have all that stuff between the 20s, those low-value carries. Looking at Ben Gretch's trap stat, which measures the percent of your touches that are carries that are not those high-value carries. That's Adrian Peterson, right? Adrian Peterson gets all of that stuff between the 20s. He doesn't get receptions, and maybe he doesn't get the goal line stuff, and that goes to Swift. And if that type of profile which Swift is already showing strong signs of, really comes to fruition for Swift, and he gets enough of the snaps to where he's really locking up all of the receiving value of the backfield, then he's just going to be a total smash. So he continues to be a buy. It hasn't quite happened. Like, are we going to see that in week 8? I don't know. We don't yet know for sure. Like, it's tough to predict if it's going to be this week that we get that profile, but I think it is going to happen at some point. He is someone, in redraft leagues to be trading for. He's a huge buy in dynasty if someone's not just holding on for dear life. At wide receiver, Kenny Golladay ran a route on 90% of dropbacks. He has a 22% target share in this game, 37% air yard share, an ADOT of 17.9, and a 0.58 Whopper. He's a really unique wide receiver, Kenny Golladay. He's the engine of this passing offense, but he has a 17.9 ADOT, right? So he's a guy who gets targeted way deeper downfield than your typical number one wide receiver. He's like a guy that you would expect to be paired with. It's almost like if he's like a combination of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, if that makes sense, right? He gets those like super deep Mike Williams types targets, but he gets more targets than anyone else on the Lions. It's really interesting. And I think, down the line, we might see him get paired with a guy who can soak up some of that volume. But for now, it's really Kenny Golladay. Marvin Jones, he did have a good week this week. 2.16 yards per route run, which is good. Ran a route on 95% of dropbacks. He had a 19% target share, 21% air yard share, an ADOT of 12, a Whopper of 0.13, which I believe must be a typo because that doesn't make sense. Jones has been abysmal this year with the yards per route run of 1.04. And, this was a bright spot, but I think this is going to be his last year with the Lions. He just has not been good, even though he did have a 2.16 yards per route run this week. So that was nice, but man, can you imagine like a premium wide receiver prospect landing here and replacing this route, this role that Marvin Jones has, which has been mostly empty routes. Golladay has a 2.77 yards per route run this season. He is a truly elite wide receiver. But like I said, he's also a guy who can open up things for other players in the offense because he runs those deep routes. TJ Hawkinson, I think, could be the guy that, before they end up drafting someone, which they probably will. But maybe to close the year here, it's Hawkinson who kind of emerges and benefits from Golladay opening things up for him. Hawkinson ran a route this week on 74% of dropbacks. He had a 21% targets per route run, a 19% target share, a 15% air yard share. On the season now, Hawkinson has a targets per route run of 19.4%. It's been up a bit to 20.5% since Galladay's been back. He's run a route, Hawkinson, on 70% of dropbacks. He needs to improve those numbers a little bit, but he is getting close to a locked-in tight end premium starter. I am starting to get more excited about Hawkinson. I was a bit down on him after a slow start, thinking that he did profile as a guy we were going to be excited about in 2021 rather than a guy who's really going to make a difference in 2020. Now I'm starting to think maybe he will make a difference to close 2020. I'm starting to get optimistic on him again. At Green Bay, Jamal Williams, he played an elite 89% of snaps this week. Also had an elite workload of 21.6 expected points. A.J. Dillon, just a rotational running back with 23% of snaps and a meaningless workload of 2.2 expected points. As expected, the Packers, no interest in playing Dexter Williams. He played 0 offensive snaps. Aaron Jones looks likely to return in week 8, but it's nice to know that Jamal Williams can operate as a workhorse in his absence and likely would again were Jones to miss any time this year. At wide receiver, look at this chart. This is worth, if you're listening to the podcast, I try to get you over to the YouTube to subscribe. We're trying to build the YouTube channel. This is a reason to do it. Go over to the YouTube and check out where Davante Adams is on this chart. Absolutely unreal week for Davante Adams. He had a route run on 97% of dropbacks, a 47% target share, 58% air yard share. He had a whopper of 1.11. Just absurd. Target per route run of 42%. He was just the offense this week. He had a yards per target of 14, which is like really good. No one's going to keep that up, but it's not even that good. Like, for as productive as he was, 13, 196, 2 touchdowns. That typically comes on just some crazy outlier efficiency. That's like, all right, he got wide open. It's like the DJ Moore catch where Teddy Bridgewater looks off the defender and then he's wide open for a long touchdown, and that happens again. And it's sort of like one of those types of days, but this was driven somewhat by efficiency, but for the most part by truly extreme volume, and then volume that was rewarded with really strong efficiency. It wasn't like you're just kind of force feeding him targets and not getting anything for it. So unbelievable day for Adams. Obviously, this is going to be an outlier week, but the fact that he has this in his range of outcomes at all is extremely impressive. And it didn't happen by just some kind of fluky stuff. It happened by him getting fed. Really exciting for Adams. He is, just the clear wide receiver 1 right now in all formats. Marquez Valdez-Scantling ran a route on 88% of dropbacks. He had a 12% target share, a 19% air yard share, and an ADOT of 11. He's been in this role all season. He gets more air yards than target share. And that happened again. But this week it was a bit of a toned down version because Davante Adams ate all the target volume. Darius Shepard was the wide receiver 3 this week, but had just a 3% target share. I mean, you can see on the chart, it really is. It's just Davante Adams, and then no one else can get targeted at a really high rate that ran any kind of routes because all the targets went to Davante Adams. At tight end, Robert Tonyan ran a route on 59% of dropbacks. Target per route run of just 10%, 6% target share. Again, Davante Adams ate up too much of the volume. It's going to hurt everybody else. But, I do think that Tonyan was probably mostly benefiting from Adams being out when he had that kind of mini breakout. I'm not sure what we have in him now. The tight end's so gross that like you have to hold on to him and see what the offense looks like when Davante Adams isn't having this huge outlier day. But I'm not all that bullish on Tonyan going forward. I do think that, Adams kind of left some of these targets out there for someone else to soak up, and Tonyan was able to do that while he was gone. And now that he's back, he may struggle to get targeted. In Houston, David Johnson played 79% of the snaps. This was his 3rd straight game of 78% plus of snaps. And he had a strong workload of 16.2 expected points. Duke Johnson played on 29% of snaps, which was up slightly from last week. And his workload also ticked up 8.2 expected points this week compared with 5.9 last week. So that was nice to see for Duke Johnson. Both running backs were efficient. David Johnson added 2.2 points to his workload, and Duke added 1. But I think these roles seem fairly set. Duke Johnson is going to steal enough work to damage David Johnson's ceiling, but not really enough to count on as a flex option. And David Johnson is going to be the clear lead back. At wide receiver, Will Fuller ran a route on 98% of dropbacks. He had a 16% target share, a 20% air yard share. Strangely uninvolved in this game, considering that his ADOT was only 8.5. It wasn't like he was getting targeted super deep downfield. But it's Will Fuller, so he's probably running some of those deeper routes, and maybe he didn't get targeted. And the stuff he did get targeted on was a bit shallow. So a little bit of a weird day for Will Fuller. Ran a lot of routes, didn't see much volume, but did save his day with a touchdown in this game. He did have a 0.51 whopper, so it wasn't terrible. Brandon Cooks ran around on 85% of dropbacks, 24% target share, 22% air yard share. He had a whopper of 0.51. On the season, Fuller has a 0.54 Whopper to Cooks' 0.52. Fuller still owns the better target per route run on a deeper ADOT, though, and I think his target volume advantage is a little understated. He did have that one game where he was, I think, banged up, which contributed to him not getting targeted. So, I do lean Fuller here as the more valuable guy, but both of these guys can be really strong plays, especially if Watson can get unleashed earlier in games. For whatever reason, they're just not using him. They want to kind of control the game with David Johnson, and then they finally allow Deshaun Watson to do his thing when it's too late. That's kind of what happened this week, and it's a real bummer to see that happening. Randall Cobb, I mean, this was tough because we thought this target tree was really condensed, that if it was going to be these two top wide receivers, and if not, then it was going to be Darren Fells. We'll get to it, but Darren Fells wasn't targeted. Randall Cobb, he ran around on 75% of dropbacks, 26% target share, 31% air yard share, and a 0.61 Whopper. He was their wide receiver one this week, which is a weird game when Randall Cobb is going to be the wide receiver one. Football is a weird game, though. We know weird stuff can happen. I wouldn't take too much away from this. Although to say that, Randall Cobb, a bit more of a ceiling than I thought he had, for sure. At tight end, Darren Fells wasn't targeted in this game. He ran a route on 73% of dropbacks, though. On the season, his targets per outrun is at just 12.8%. It was at 17% entering the week. So, this should be something that we were prepared for. That if he's only having on the season entering the week, he's only had a 17% targets per outrun, then within his range of outcomes is going to be a really, really low target game. And that's what we happen to have this week. I do want to look up, I think I mentioned Will Fuller's Whopper this week is too low. He had a 0.38 Whopper this week. Brandon Cooks had a 0.51. I said Fuller had a 501 too, but that was incorrect. Moving to the Jacksonville Jaguars. With Chris Thompson out, which I didn't really hear about beforehand. That was something I'd missed entering the week. But Chris Thompson was out in this game, and James Robinson played a massive 90% of snaps. Robinson was the only running back with a carry or a target in this game. He accounted for 100% of the 23 expected points that this backfield has as his total workload. So that's an elite workload for Robinson, 23 expected points, and the only running back with a workload this week. Daria Gumbawale mixed in for 10% of snaps. Obviously did not have a target or a carry. Devin Azigbo was active but did not play an offensive snap. Chris Thompson is on the COVID IR list. And then Jacksonville has a bye this coming week. So Thompson hopefully will be recovered when they come out of bye, and he'll likely eat into Robinson's workload again when he returns. So that's something to keep in mind. Robinson's volume a bit spiked here because Chris Thompson was missing. At wide receiver, DJ Chark ran a route on 29% of dropbacks. He had a 29% target share, a 47% air yard share, and a 0.77 Whopper. That all looks awesome, but it was not an awesome week to own DJ Chark. It was not an awesome week to be DJ Chark. He was really pissed off about the way this game went. He's got the underlying volume. They do know, that he is the guy, but it's not connecting for him. He only had one catch for 26 yards. So it's going to be frustrating. Now, we're thinking maybe they're going to go to Mike Glennon, but I don't think that's going to help. So I think what would help is if this offense was a bit more up-tempo and if they weren't so reliant on James Robinson. This was a game where it was a shootout, and yet the Jacksonville side was really running their offense through James Robinson with that huge 23 expected point workload, where the Chargers were running their offense through Justin Herbert. And, I think that I get why they don't trust Gardner Minshew and they don't want to, run the offense, without they want to put the ball in James Robinson's hands as much as they can get away with. And I kind of get it, but at the same time, I think that's probably damaging Sharks fantasy value more than having Glennon versus Minshew. I just don't think that's going to make that much of a difference. In fact, it maybe will make a difference in a bad way. Laviska Shenault ran a route in this game on 75% of dropbacks. He had a 12% target share, a 6% air yard share. He continues to make plays. He has a yards per route run of 1.64 this season, which is pretty good, but he's also having trouble breaking out in this offense. Keelan Cole ran a route on 86% of dropbacks. He had an 8% target share, a 7% air yard share, and his ADOT spiked last week, as I mentioned, but it was back down this week to 8.5, kind of where we expected. He is the slot wide receiver. Kind of a low ceiling option. I mentioned the ADOT spike because it was kind of interesting. Like, hey, if he's going to run a bit deeper, then we've got to reconsider who Keelan Cole is in our minds. He was back to being exactly who we think Keelan Cole is. D.D. Westbrook looks to have torn his ACL in this game. Wasn't getting a ton of playing time, but a bit of a note on that. At tight end, James O'Shaughnessy ran a route on 50% of dropbacks. He had a 17% targets per route run, a 15.4% target per route run on the season, and he's not even really running a full slate of routes, so there's not much to see here. I did mention earlier Marvin Jones's Whopper. I think I said 0.14, something crazy. That was Marvin Hall's Whopper. Marvin Jones had a decent Whopper this week of 0.43. In Kansas City, this was an extreme blowout. And so it's going to make it difficult to evaluate what even happened or what we can take away. And that sucks because this was the game we needed to figure out what's going to happen going forward with Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Le'Veon Bell. But there are, I think, a couple things we can look at. DeAndre Washington had 10 snaps. He played on the last drive of the game. I think he might have been in for the kneel downs as well. We can throw out DeAndre Washington snaps. They're nothing to take going forward. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was in on the fourth drive of the fourth quarter. So I think the split between him and Bell could be indicative of the future usage that we get. Edwards-Helaire had 53% of the snaps to Bell's 33%. He had 9.4 expected points to Bell's 3.1. CEH had 4 targets in this game while Bell wasn't targeted. So based on the snaps, based on kind of this weird game, and also, it's just one game where you think maybe Bell would earn more and more as he gets more comfortable with the offense. But just based on this game, it looks like a timeshare with CEH on the right side of it and still very startable, while Bell kind of looks like a high variance flex option, someone that probably will have some standalone value, and an improvement basically on Darrell Williams, and obviously Bell now with elite contingent value. Tyreek Hill ran a route on 83% of dropbacks. He had a 42% target share, a 58% air yard share. Demarcus Robinson had a 4% target share and 2% air yard share while running a route on 72% of dropbacks. Byron Pringle ran a route on 62% of dropbacks but wasn't targeted. And then Mecole Hardman ran a route on 38% of dropbacks. He had an 8% target share, a 26% air yard share, a 21.5 ADOT. A 21.5 ADOT for Mecole Hardman. Could have been a nice day. He's a lot more exciting than the other options outside of Hill, but he only running a route on 38% of dropbacks is not going to get it done, not running nearly enough routes. Nice to see Tyreek Hill be so heavily involved. A bit of a quiet season for Hill. But man, I mean, if this wasn't a blowout and he was getting even close to the 42% target share, 58% air yard share, that's that kind of massive volume that could break a slate. So exciting to see from him. Travis Kelce, he ran around on 84% of dropbacks, had a 12% target share. His ADOT was minus 0.3. Kind of weird, but not taking too much from it. Kelce obviously remains a stud. nice to see that Hill has this volume, as I mentioned, and CEH is looking like the 1A in a committee. I think that's what we can take so far, but yeah, this was a weird week for Kansas City, just given the snow, given the matchup, given the game script. Moving to Las Vegas. Yeah, so Josh Jacobs played the Buccaneers this week, which is going to be really tough. And it's also tough not just because of the matchup, but because of the way the Raiders use him. Jacobs played on just 49% of snaps in this game. He ceded 29% of snaps to Jalen Richard and 23% to Devontae Booker. Jacobs did have 4 targets in this game. He turned that into 3 receptions for 14 yards. But, and this comes from Hayden Winks' work at RotoWorld, he got 0 third down targets and just 1 target in a passing down situation. And Jacobs' workload was also pretty weak. He only had 11.6 expected points and lost a total of 7.7 expected points to Richard and Booker. So it's not that Jacobs can't have big days. It's that he's highly game script dependent. You know, he's kind of like in a Kenyon Drake style role. He doesn't have a guy as talented behind him like Chase Edmonds, but he's not or maybe kind of a Ronald Jones type of role where he is getting targeted on early downs, but he doesn't get used on third downs and obvious passing situations. When they get into like the 2-minute drill and that type of thing, then he's coming off the field. Why is this happening? I don't know. I don't know why he's getting pigeonholed into an early down role. He profiled as kind of a low volume passing down back as a prospect. So it doesn't make any sense, but I'm not going to lose money betting on John Gruden to wise up. So I think what we have to realize with Jacobs is that he is going to be a guy who can smash in the right game environments, but not that anyone was necessarily going to be psyched about playing him against Tampa Bay in the first place, but he is a guy that you need to be very selective about when to play Jacobs, I think. Hopefully, the Raiders, they get the Browns at home this week, potential this week right now to get a better game environment for Jacobs. At wide receiver, Henry Ruggs ran around on 78% of dropbacks. He had an 8% target share, a 14% air yard share, an ADOT of 14.3, and a whopper of 0.22. Bit of a down game for Ruggs on the season. This isn't going to be all that uncommon. On the season, his ADOT is 20. He is going to be pretty volatile this season. This game, his ADOT was 14.3. And he didn't get all that much in terms of volume, but I think, like I said earlier in the show, that type of thing can happen where it's not just about connecting on the air yards, but sometimes when you have the guy with that deep threat profile, maybe he doesn't get a target or two that really swings things in terms of the underlying volume and potentially in terms of the production. Ruggs has been pretty efficient this year, 2.12 yards per out run. That's an elite number if you can keep it up over the course of a season. Still just a small sample so far, just 100 routes, so we can't say that he's, kind of showing elite level in terms of yards per out run just yet, but he is on track for a very strong rookie season, and he does look like a dynasty buy to me, especially after this week where you have Nelson Agholor kind of coming out of nowhere and emerging as like, is Nelson Agholor the wide receiver 1 now? Nelson Agholor ran around on 83% of dropbacks. He had a 25% target share, a 45% air yard share. He was also a deep threat, a 15.7 ADOT, but he really got the volume. He had a whopper of 0.69. That's the 45% air yard share really showing up especially. Agholor has played well this season. He has a yards per out run of 1.86, but this was a big outlier for him in terms of volume. On the season, his whopper is at 0.28. So a massive jump from that to a 0.69. That really is a massive jump. That's like, kind of almost an afterthought type of Michael Gallup-y type of role this past week to, a number 1 wide receiver type of role. So I'm not really buying it with Agholor. I think he could kind of get you through some bye weeks. Drew Dinkmeyer was offered a 6th-round pick for him in our Dynasty League, and he turned that down. I think that's fair. He's not worth nothing. But, I would say that, he's kind of a spot start for now. if he can provide you cover in getting Henry Ruggs in a trade, then that's awesome. I think maybe this is a good week to send some offers for Ruggs. Hunter Renfrow ran a route on 59% of dropbacks. He had a 17% target share, 10% air yard share, a 5.5 ADOT, a whopper of 0.32. Renfrow finished above 2 yards per route run as a rookie last year on a decent sample. That was pretty bullish. It was tough to know, how much to take from that, just given like his profile and the fact that they clearly were looking to replace him by drafting Henry Ruggs, by drafting Bryan Edwards, by bringing in guys like Aguilar. So, not someone that I think anyone was really all that excited about. But this year, he's at a yards per route run of 1.93, another borderline elite season in terms of yards per route run. I don't know if he's ever going to be fantasy relevant. He's not going to be running a ton of routes this season, but he is profiling like a Cole Beasley type of guy that's just going to stick in the NFL for a long time. So I don't know. Take that for what it's worth. Maybe he's valuable in like some of those deep dynasty leagues where you just have a ton of flexes. I would say Hunter Renfrow would be nice to get kind of cheap as a little throw-in, because maybe you have him on your roster for like 5 years and you can kind of flex him through the bye weeks every year. At tight end, Darren Waller continues to be incredibly steady. Ran a route on 76% of dropbacks, had a 25% target share, a 14% air yard share, target per route run of 23%. On the season, his target per route run is up to 20, or I guess down a little bit, to 26.4%. But hey, if you can have a 23% targets per route run, which is really good and actually lowers your season-long targets per route run, you're having an awesome season. He is a truly elite tight end right now. This is in line, his targets per route run, with where he was last year. And last year was just hard to know what to make of it. We do see guys who are one and done at the tight end position that are just one-year wonders, the Gary Barnages of the world. We see those guys, the Jake Ballards. And so it was a little tough to know if Darren Waller is the guy that we should be buying into. It's not all that uncommon to see guys break out late at the tight end position, but it can be a little disconcerting because some of the guys who have been the one-year wonders have been guys who broke out later in their career. So it just kind of made you queasy. At least it made me a little queasy to take Darren Waller, especially in like the big money leagues, to really bet on him. But that was the right move. Darren Waller is really going to pay off at his ADP this year. I think he is a truly elite tight end right now. Moving to the Chargers. At running back, big bounce back week for Joshua Kelly. He led the backfield in snap share this week, 47%. And he led the backfield in expected points at 14.4. And he was targeted 5 times. So really nice week. He also kept the rookie running back off a bye week narrative alive and well, which is very important. And he looks like a very solid flex / running back 2 option moving forward with Eckler out. Justin Jackson had a 38% snap share in this game, way down from 59% that he saw in week 5. He did have 11.9 expected points, which is really nice, especially given that the snap share had fallen way off for him to have that much value. And that was driven because he was targeted 6 times, so that the receiving volume really drove his workload. It's nice that there were 11 targets to go around here. 5 to Kelly, 6 for Jackson. I'm really liking what I'm seeing out of Justin Herbert. Loving what he's doing for the downfield wide receivers, as we'll get to, but I think he's also creating a ton of value for this backfield, ton of receiving value for this backfield. And I think he can make both of these guys flex options based on the receiving volume. At wide receiver, Keenan Allen ran a route on 88% of dropbacks. He had a 31% target share, a 27% air yard share, an ADOT of 8.1, and a 0.66 whopper. Allen is seeing truly elite volume in an offense that can actually be productive. He's got a good quarterback. He's an extremely valuable asset. Like, that type of thing doesn't happen. Like, a lot of these guys that get the extreme volume, we've talked about DJ Shark, get to Terry McLaurin. Like, you'll see these guys, they have the elite volume, but the quarterback plays in question. The offensive environment is sometimes in question. When we have like DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams, Keenan Allen is kind of on that list. Like, he is one of the few guys who are actually excited about his quarterback play. The offense is willing to be fast-paced, much more so than we would have thought for the Chargers and Anthony Lynn. This is a game I think a lot of people expected them to really be run heavy and try to slow it down. It didn't really play out that way. And I think that's very bullish for Keenan Allen. He is a very, very valuable. I'm not saying he's like, he isn't as valuable as Devontae Adams and DeAndre Hopkins, but I think like Stephon Diggs is probably a good like way to think about Keenan Allen's value right now. I think he's probably comparable to Stephon Diggs in terms of his value. Both of these guys are like this elite wide receivers, and Allen maybe is arguably more valuable than Diggs because he's getting just such a massive share of the offense, where I think Diggs is sometimes, he just doesn't quite have the target ceiling that Allen has shown with Herbert so far. Mike Williams ran around on 83% of dropbacks, a 7% target share, a 12% air yard share. He had an ADOT of 15.7 and a Whopper of 0.19. Jalen Guyton ran around on 75% of dropbacks, a 7% target share for him this week, 14% air yard share, and 18 ADOT. So 18 for Guyton and 15.7 for Williams. Both these guys not really all that heavily targeted, just a Whopper of 0.19 for Williams and 0.21 for Guyton. Both those pretty damn low. On the season, Williams now has an ADOT of 14.3 and Guyton has an ADOT of 23. So this offense is interesting. It's got Williams with an ADOT of 14.3, Guyton with an ADOT of 23. Both those are, Williams is kind of a more of a traditional deep threat. Guyton, this like kind of constantly going super deep, kind of clear out routes type of role. And both those guys are running a ton of routes. They're each running more than 75% of routes on the season. And so it's going to make both of them very inconsistent with the deep ADOTs, particularly Guyton with the deeper of the two. I mean, 8 out of 23 is ridiculous. But I think it's helping to open up offense for the underneath options. And this is probably one of the reasons that Keenan Allen is seeing so many targets, because the other two wide receivers are just running deep. And that's opening things up for Allen. I think it's also opening things up for the tight ends. Hunter Henry in this game ran around on 73% of dropbacks, had a 17% targets per route run, a 17% target share. Virgil Green ran around on 19% of dropbacks, 22% targets per route run, 22% targets per route run in this game. But will likely be out for several weeks after badly turning his ankle on a touchdown catch, which is a bummer for him because that's a pretty good game. 22% target per route run there and a touchdown. And then Donald Parham ran around on 13% of dropbacks. He had a 17% target per route run. And so nice to see him get involved as the XFL star. However, it was frustrating since both Parham and Green got touchdowns, and Hunter Henry, who's a guy that I've been getting more and more excited about, did not get in the end zone. On the season, Henry has run a route on 80% of dropbacks. He has a targets per route run of 20.4%, a 20% target share. Keenan Allen is sucking up enough volume to really prevent Hunter Henry from being a truly elite option most weeks. But I do think he has elite performances in his range of outcomes. And maybe now with Virgil Green out, he could see even more, a little higher, a little tick up in his targets per route run. We'll see. But I'm still pretty excited about Hunter Henry, even with Keenan Allen just soaking up volume. I thought when Herbert came under center, I thought Keenan Allen's volume would decrease a little bit from where, it started out, but it really hasn't. And maybe it will, but, and if it does, I think that does help Henry because the dynamic of this offense, like I talked about, you have the two deep wide receivers and it's Henry and Allen are kind of battling now for more of the underneath stuff. And if some of that goes away from Allen and towards Henry, obviously that would be hopeful for us Henry owners. And then alternatively, maybe he's able to consolidate a little bit more of the tight end volume here with Virgil Green, likely to miss at least a few weeks. Moving to LA. Darrell Henderson had 56% of the snaps in this game, 11.7 expected points. Henderson left 2 points on the field. Not a great day for him, although I thought he looked pretty good. Malcolm Brown had 40% of the snaps and 10.6 expected points. Brown added 1.1 points to his workload, so he actually played fairly efficiently. Cam Akers only played 3 snaps in this game. None of these Rams running backs are really dominating, but I think Henderson looks good. The path for Akers is probably through Malcolm Brown. Brown is running back 26 of 36 qualifying running backs in elusive rating. He is running back 31 of 35 running backs in breakaway percentage. So he's not making people miss, and he's not breaking away. He's not really doing much, but they're playing him a lot. I'm not sure why. I do think eventually you would just think they'd play Akers. I mean, Akers seems like more ready than Darrell Henderson did last year. But I don't know. Maybe they're just like, in a weird way, like, does Henderson looking good now hurt Akers? Like, maybe they're happy with how they redshirted Henderson now that he looks good. I don't know. It's weird. It's weird they're playing Malcolm Brown this much. He doesn't look very good, and the numbers also say that he has not been good this year. The numbers aren't great for Henderson either, and that would be good for Akers too if they eventually just kind of get fed up with the overall production of this duo. But Akers is, to only get 3 snaps, it's not like it's imminent in terms of the role change here. At wide receiver, Cooper Kupp ran a route on 91% of dropbacks. He had a 19% target share, 8% air yard share, just an ADOT of 3.5, down really too low to deliver strong value. His Whopper was 0.35. Robert Woods ran a route on 86% of dropbacks. He had a target share of 16%, an air yard share of 18%. His Whopper was 0.37. Josh Reynolds ran a route on 89% of dropbacks. He had a 26% target share and a 53% air yard share. Of the Rams wide receivers who ran more than 3 routes, he was the only one that had an ADOT above 10. His ADOT was 17.6. This has been a feature of the Rams offense all year. It's that Van Jefferson and Josh Reynolds have the deep threat role in this offense. Now, Van Jefferson was barely involved. He had 3 routes in this game. He was that kind of the reason I said, the players with more than 3 routes, because Van Jefferson kind of filled in for Josh Reynolds on a couple of plays, it looked like. And he also was targeted beyond 10 yards because they kind of share that role, and they've been fighting for that role all year. Reynolds has really won that battle, and now he is getting a lot of volume. He was kind of the wide receiver 1 this week. He had a 0.76 Whopper, which is like a number 1 wide receiver level. Obviously, just 1 week. Don't want to get too carried away. But on the season, he has a 0.38 Whopper, which isn't that far behind Kupp and Woods. Kupp has 0.51 Whopper on the season. Woods is at 0.49. He is a tier below the other 2. It's kind of, those guys are sort of tied as the co-wide receiver 1, and then he is a tier below. But it is interesting, kind of an interesting dart throw on any given week because he has a different role than them. So if the offense is able to challenge deep more than they typically do, it will come through Josh Reynolds. Much more likely that it comes through Josh Reynolds than the other wide receivers. Overall, though, it's Cooper Kupp who looks like the best bet, because while the Whopper is very similar for Kupp and Woods, Kupp does get targeted at the highest rate. So assuming, we're talking PPR here, Kupp is a bit of a better bet than Woods. I guess for standard leagues, though, they're pretty much equal. At tight end, Gerald Everett ran a route on 57% of dropbacks, a little bit below what I was hoping, and that's because Johnny Munt was pretty involved. He ran a route on 40% of dropbacks. Nothing against Munt, but this was disappointing, right? Because Gerald Everett, I was hoping to see him out there like 65, 70% of dropbacks. And to only be out there 57% with Munt at 40%, not only hurts Everett's value in any time that Higbee missed. I mean, I think Higbee's probably going to be back, but he could miss time later on. But I think it also hurts the contingency value case for Higbee because, if Everett were to miss time, I would imagine Munt would probably also fill in as well. The good news on Everett is that he had a targets per route run of 25%. So not having Higbee out there to compete with for targets is probably good. Any of those 2 tight end set stuff, that's all good. And Everett, I think, is a very good player. I think Higbee and Everett are good players. I just think they happen to be competing with each other. So that was nice to see that Everett was targeted at a higher rate. He's been down just under 20% on the season. So that target per route run spiked. His routes also spiked, but just not as high as I was hoping. Moving to New England. Cam Newton was benched in this game, but it does look like he's going to be the starter going forward. So nothing to worry about too much there, although obviously it's concerning he was benched at all. Rex Burkhead played on 48% of snaps. He had 7.3 expected points. Damon Harris played 40% of snaps. He had 6.2 expected points. James White played just 19% of snaps. He had 0 carries. He had 1 target for 1.5 expected points. Not sure what's going on. I mean, James White was coming off a 9-target game down to just 1. His usage is pretty perplexing right now. Something to keep an eye on there if you see any context around why that was the case. Rex Burkhead's usage was probably just noise. He was boosted by playing in garbage time here. So, yeah, I don't think we take anything from that, really. Damian Harris, I guess maybe his usage was like the thing we can see is the most real. But, I mean, do we want Damian Harris? He's got, kind of a committee role in this really, really struggling offense. But I guess he was the guy that came out the best from the backfield this week. At wide receiver, Damiere Byrd ran around on 93% of dropbacks. Target per route run here of 7%, which is obviously not good. An ADOT of 11, so it wasn't even that deep of an ADOT, which makes me a little bit more concerned about the targets per route run. Still, on the season, he has a whopper of 0.45, which isn't bad. N'Keal Harry ran a route on 13% of dropbacks, and he may have been concussed in this game. It's possible that he does not come back to a job. He has been really bad this year. Jacoby Myers, if N'Keal Harry loses his job, it'll be Jacoby Myers who replaces him. He was very strong in this game. He ran around on 87% of dropbacks. He had a 27% target share. He had 64% of the air yards. And an elite whopper there, with that many air yards, you're going to have an elite whopper of 0.85. His yards per route run was also very strong at 2.31. He'd been mostly running empty routes prior to this week. So it's not like we can necessarily just completely buy into this really strong performance, but definitely it's worth keeping an eye on him. If it looks like Harry's going to miss any time, this team is desperate for playmakers, and we've yet to see really anyone step up and have a week that looks very promising. So it's probably just noise with Myers, but I think if he's going to get a chance to reprise this role in week 8, then we should, at least take a peek and see if he can do it again. Because Harry has been disappointing enough that I don't think they would hesitate to sit him down if they thought they had some kind of connection with Myers and Newton. Julian Edelman had 14% target share while running a route on 60% of dropbacks. He had a 0.29 whopper, a target per route run of 17%. He started the season with really strong target share. He had 37% target share and then 26% target share in week 2. So 37% in week 1, 26% in week 2. Since then, he has topped out at 22% target share. He has 2 weeks below 20%, including this week with 14%, which was a season low. He's still a flex option, but not a great one. He looked there to start the season like he was going to have this awesome volume. He's being used deeper downfield. Maybe he was going to have this resurgence with Cam Newton. That seems to be off the table now. Now you're really struggling to even consider starting him. At tight end, Dalton Keene made his NFL debut, and he ran around on 50% of dropbacks. Definitely worth adding this week. Dalton Keene in deep tight end premium dynasty leagues. I mean, not worth. I wouldn't add him even in the FFPC because, he wasn't target. But he was out there on 50% of routes. He was targeted. He has 6.7 targets per route run. But Was he really 6.7? That's pretty low. He might just be a blocking tight end, but he is getting playing time. He's on an offense that's desperate for playmakers, and he's a tight end with a pulse. He's a rookie. I would definitely pick him up in those tight end premium dynasty, and he probably should be on your watch list for FFPC. See if he makes any kind of noise, and then at that point could be a cheap pickup. Moving to New Orleans. Alvin Kamara's workload was pretty impressive this week at 19.5, and kind of also below the expectations that we had for him this week. With Michael Thomas out, there was the potential for him to just kind of explode with his workload. He did have a very strong workload at 19.5, but wasn't that massive workload we thought maybe was possible. Kamara also only added 3.3 points above expectations. That's pretty good. 3.3 points added to a 19.5 workload. That's great, actually, but it's Kamara, so we're kind of expecting him to be this superstar, which he was a star. He was a star this week, not a superstar. Latavius Murray stole 8.5 expected points this week, which is what prevented Kamara from having that absolutely massive workload. Murray left 1.9 points on the field. Kamara played 73% of the snaps in this game to Murray's 33%. Pretty typical usage. Just happened that Kamara didn't go nuclear this game. At wide receiver, Traquan Smith ran a route on 100% of dropbacks. He had an 8 out of 9.2, which is like the primary wide receiver depth that I tend to like, especially with Drew Brees. It's on a bit on the shallower end of where, when wide receivers are operating in like that 9 to 12 to maybe 13 range, it's kind of like the depth where you tend to see those primary wide receivers. So this is a bit on the shallower end of that, but still nice. And he was only targeted on 11% of his routes, which is pretty gross. So he's being used in a way that's really exciting. He's getting a nice mix of targets, not too deep, not too shallow. He's out there literally all the time, but he's not getting targets. I think this is probably on Smith, or at least on his fit with Brees. But it's the type of thing where, I don't think he's the type of guy to just keep going back to the well with. I talked about when setting up the charts that we want to be wary of guys who are out there all the time and not getting targeted. You can see Traquan Smith. He's sitting right in this spot where I would be wary of. And this is happening on a low ADOT. So not something where it's just like, yeah, he's running a lot of routes. He didn't get a lot of targets, but that's because he's getting targeted 20 yards downfield on it. That's not happening. He's not Jalen Guyton. He's running with at an 8 out of 9.2 this week. So it's a disappointing day for Traquan Smith, and I think a concerning day for Traquan Smith owners. And, just someone I wouldn't really be interested in playing, even if somehow, Michael Thomas is out again. Wouldn't want to go back to the well on Smith in DFS all that much either. Marquez Callaway, more interesting. He ran a route on 95% of dropbacks. He had a 28% target share, a 35% air yard share. He had an 8 out of just 5.5, which isn't the worst thing when you're playing with Drew Brees. A yards per route run of 2.08. I don't know much about Callaway. I'm assuming you don't either. He's a undrafted free agent. He's a rookie. He had kind of this weird profile as a receiver. Came out of Tennessee. He had a 39% dominator rating as a true sophomore. That dominator rating is the market share of your receiving yards and market share of your touchdowns combined. So he has that. He had a dominator rating of 39%, which is really built on the touchdown side of things. He got 56% of Tennessee's receiving touchdowns as a true sophomore. Then as a junior, he was much better as a yardage producer. He had 29% of Tennessee's yards. His touchdowns fell way off. And then as a senior, he again topped 30% of Tennessee's touchdowns, but his yardage fell off. So he never kind of put the yardage and the touchdown scoring together in the same season. He did a little bit as a sophomore, but it was mostly just the massive, massive share of touchdowns that gave him the high dominator rating. So not a great profile, but kind of like this weird profile where he showed that he could score touchdowns at a high rate. He showed that he could put up a decent receiving yardage percentage, but never really would have popped in the type, any type of models and stuff. He wouldn't have popped in that. But he does have NFL size and athleticism, and I do think that he's a dynasty ad based on this performance alone. He's actually decently athletic. He's got kind of prototypical wide receiver size in the NFL, fast enough, good jumps. So, yeah, on the season now, he has a 16.7 target per route run, a 1.49 yards per route run. Not the type of guy that I'm like falling all over myself to pick up in season long. I think he's more of like a guy that could develop into a bigger part of the offense over time, and that this was him basically flashing that. So he doesn't have this profile where I think he's going to be a great redraft ad, but still a pretty interesting game out of Marcus Callaway. Deontay Harris got in the end zone here. He ran around on only 42% of dropbacks. He's interesting if he gets more playing time, but so far just a name to monitor. At tight end, Jared Cook ran a route on 55% of dropbacks. He had a 19% targets per route run. Lost 24% of routes to Adam Troutman in this game. Cooks is not being targeted. He's being targeted enough, but not enough for Troutman to start stealing work. So this is concerning. If Cook is falling into a timeshare, then he is going to be far less startable. And he's also someone that, if you can trade off of, like I would consider trading off of him in redraft. In Dynasty, you're obviously not going to get much for him. But, if you can trade off him in redraft, now would be the time. Thomas is coming back anyway. Troutman getting work and Cook's routes falling is a pretty concerning sign, given that Thomas is coming back and is going to soak up a ton of volume. Everyone knows Thomas is coming back, so you're going to have trouble moving him. But I would try. Moving to the Giants, Devonta Freeman suffered an ankle injury in the third quarter of this game. This contributed to him only playing 20% of snaps, but doesn't fully explain it because Wayne Gallman, he led the backfield with 53% of snaps. He had a 13.8 expected points workload. Dion Lewis had 25% of the snaps and 3.1 expected points. Gallman looks like a weak flex option as we head into week 9 against Tampa Bay. Because the Giants have a bye coming up. So Freeman hopefully gets right over in the bye, but even if he doesn't, Gallman kind of looks weak against Tampa Bay. So this was kind of like a spot to hopefully you played Gallman in Showdown. I didn't, but I'm not sure we're going to get too much value out of Gallman going forward. At wide receiver, Darius Slayton ran a route on 97% of dropbacks. He had a 14% target share, a 29% air yard share. Sterling Shepard ran around on 76% of dropbacks with a 28% target share and a 30% air yard share. Shepard had an ADOT of 6.8 to Slayton's 13.2. That's why they have such similar air yard shares, even though Shepard had a lot more targets. Shepard had a whopper of 0.62 to Slayton's 0.41. And Shepard on the season now has a 23% targets per route run, which is really strong. And he has the potential to form a tandem here, a co-wide receiver one type of tandem with Slayton. I'm leaning towards thinking Slayton operates as the number one wide receiver most weeks, just given how strong he's been to start the year. But this was a strong showing from Shepard, and he soaked up a lot of the volume here. I think Slayton with the deeper role, he'll need less to get there, and so even if they do form that tandem, I still slightly prefer Slayton, but definitely possible now that Shepard has a pretty meaningful role. Golden Tate ran a route on 62% of dropbacks. He had a nice touchdown catch, but that was his only reception. And he had a whopper of 0.21. He can be safely ignored. At tight end, Evan Ingram ran a route on 82% of dropbacks. He had a 31% target share, 31% air yard share, a target per route run of 29%, which is really nice. Still that low ADOT this week of 6.2. He also dropped a game-winning reception. He has a 20% target share this season, which is pretty good, but it's a 20% target share within an offense that's struggling with Daniel Jones, so still uninspiring. Moving to the Jets, LaMichael Kerrane may have pulled ahead of Frank Gore this week. He had 70% of snaps to just 28% for Gore, 9.8 expected points for Gore. 9.8 expected points for Kerrane, 5.2 to Gore, and Kerrane had 3 targets to 0 for Gore. So that's all good, but obviously it's a Jets offense. We're not too excited, but Kerrane, we actually started him in a main event team where we're just kind of desperate, and that's a team where we had Aaron Jones and McCaffrey missing the games due to injury. So we started Kerrane, and nice little desperation play that paid off, and I think he's going to be good for some more desperation plays going forward. Master motivator Adam Gase rewarded Ty Johnson for his explosive Week 6 runs with 0 offensive snaps, so not something we have to worry about as Kerrane owners. Ty Johnson, although it's sort of inexplicable, it does not seem to be involved at all going forward. And Kerrane can kind of help us through the bye weeks. At wide receiver, Denzel Mims made his debut, and is pretty good debut. On the good side, he ran a route on 79% of dropbacks. He had a 32% target share, 26% target per route run, a really nice whopper, especially for a rookie in his debut, of 0.59, and a yards per route run of 1.83. The bad news is that his ADOT was super low, 2.6, and as a result, he only had 16% of the air yards. So would like to see him used deeper downfield, but all in all, I would say it was pretty promising. The other thing to note is that Jamison Crowder was not in that game. Jamison Crowder soaks up a ton of the volume of this offense, so we'll have to see how involved Mims is once Crowder's back, and if he's used any differently at all, given that Crowder can sometimes be used a bit more shallow. Brashad Perriman left the game with a possible concussion. He did run a route on 93% of dropbacks in this game, so we got kind of a full game out of him. And so from that perspective, when evaluating Mims, we did basically see a full game from Perriman. Just a 7% target per route run for Perriman, though, an ADOT of 8.5, not a very good game from Perriman. Braxton Berrios does appear to be Crowder's direct backup. He ran a route on 90% of dropbacks. He had a 32% target share, a 38% air yard share, and a 27% target per route run. Sam Darnold loves throwing to the slot wide receiver. This is definitely worth noting if Crowder misses another game, that Berrios is probably going to soak up a fair amount of that volume. Chris Herndon ran more routes than Ryan Griffin in this game, but neither was targeted. Both of these guys can be left on waivers. Moving to Philadelphia, Boston Scott was a borderline workhorse in Week 7 with 69% of snaps, 73% of the expected points workload, 14.3 points of expected points. Sorry, he had an expected points workload of 14.3 points in this game, which was worth 73% of the total value. He lost a combined 5.2 points to Jason Huntley and Corey Clement. Jason Huntley played just 10% of snaps, but had 2 attempts for 13 yards and a target. Clement was in for 22% of snaps, but rushed for just 9 yards on 2 attempts and had 1 reception for 12 yards on 1 target. So it does look like the Boston Scott show right now until Miles Sanders gets back. I was a little bit pessimistic that might be the case, given how involved Clement was, and given that Boston Scott really had no value when Sanders was there, but he really kind of shined as the replacement this week. At wide receiver, Deshaun Jackson was injured in this game and will likely miss 6 to 8 weeks. He ran a route on 63% of dropbacks in this game. Travis Fulgham ran a route on 98% of dropbacks. He had a 27% target share, a 41% air yard share, an ADOT of 12.1, which is right in that kind of primary wide receiver range that I was mentioning earlier. A whopper of 0.69 is really starting to look like a number 1 wide receiver. He's getting used at that depth. He's getting that type of whopper. He has a 0.65 whopper on the season, which is really nice, kind of that wide receiver 1 type of level. That's exactly where I was saying, I hope Jerry Jeudy gets to now with Tim Patrick out. And that's right where Tim Fulgham or right where Travis Fulgham already is. There's some things that are going to be changing. Oh, I also want to mention on Fulgham, Sam Hoppen, who does these charts. If you check at Sam Hoppen on Twitter, he had some more charts that get into intermediate air yards, which I think is pretty interesting. So check out that thread that he had on intermediate air yards, because Travis Fulgham really popped in that. And so what he's looking at there is who's getting those types of intermediate targets and who's racking up air yards through those targets. Basically, who's operating at those intermediate depths, who's kind of operating at that primary wide receiver. Obviously, primary wide receivers are going to get targeted more shallow sometimes, and they are going to get targeted deeper downfield as well. But you can kind of rack up really valuable targets in that intermediate range, and Travis Fulgham is doing that right now. So I definitely recommend checking that out on Sam's Twitter, again, at Sam Hoppen. But things are changing now for Fulgham. We've got Alshon Jeffrey potentially coming back. Jalen Reagor looks like he's going to be back potentially this week, although they have a week 9 bye. So I would say it's more likely that he starts practicing, misses this week, and then comes back week 10. But regardless, Fulgham is either going to get 0 or 1 more games before Reagor's back. And so it's worth thinking about how his role is potentially going to change. The way I'm thinking about this is that I think Reagor is going to take over the John Hightower role. Hightower right now has an ADOT of 20.6. He has been targeted on 11.6% of his routes. Before being injured, Reagor had an ADOT of 18.9. He was targeted on 11.9% of his routes. So basically exactly the same. 20.6 to 18.9 in terms of ADOT, 11.6 to 11.9 in terms of targets per out run. Reagor's been more effective than Hightower's been. Reagor had a yards per out run of 1.43 to Hightower's 0.92. So I think he is going to add more value to the offense, but that should probably help Fulgham, not necessarily hurt him. I do think that Reagor will not be pigeonholed the same way that Hightower has been. Yes, Reagor ran a similar ADOT, but he did so on a pretty small sample. And what we know from training camp is that they were excited based on everything that I was reading about involving him on some shorter stuff as well. They think he can be used at all levels of the field. So I would say, while he will take over Hightower's role, I think that Hightower role will incorporate some more stuff that's a bit shallow, a bit intermediate. And that actually could hurt Fulgham. It could take away some of that volume. But I think that for the most part, he could open up some more intermediate targets for Fulgham by driving coverage, by converting, by just keeping the offense on the field, by getting them into the red zone, that type of thing. He could also take away some targets that might have otherwise gone to Fulgham. So I don't think it will be that big of a deal to have Reagor back. If Alshon Jeffrey comes back and they use him quite a bit, I think that could hurt Fulgham potentially considerably. But at this point, I'm skeptical of that. I'm skeptical that they'll literally play Jeffrey over Fulgham. They know that they're not going to have Jeffrey next year. They don't want to have Jeffrey next year. So if they think they have something in Fulgham, which I think they're starting to think they might, then his role shouldn't change all that much, and might be a sneaky buy right now if his owner is getting a little bit nervous. I wouldn't overpay, but I wouldn't mind taking a shot. At tight end, Richard Rodgers ran a route on 65% of dropbacks, had a 19% target per route run, 20% target share. Pretty solid outing, but he ran a bit hot. His yards per target was 14.2. So, he ran hot, but he does look like an asset with Ertz and Goddard out. For as long as they're out, to be out there on 65% of dropbacks, getting a 19% target per route run, not elite, but still pretty solid, pretty nice for just being able to pick him up off waivers. Moving to Pittsburgh, James Conner played 84% of snaps. He had an elite workload of 21.6 expected points. He did lose a touchdown to Snell. But, he also lost that touchdown carry, and Conner had an elite expected points workload, 21.6. So he is a strong weekly running back option for sure, even with some of these other running backs a little bit involved. And they were kind of all involved this week in a somewhat interesting way. Benny Snell had 8% of snaps. He was the only one with any real meaningful workload. 5.7 expected points for Snell. And again, did have that touchdown. Jalen Samuels was in for 11% of snaps, and then Anthony McFarland was in for 6% of snaps. So kind of a backup by committee this week. But yeah, Snell was the only one with any kind of meaningful expected points value. At wide receiver, Deontay Johnson. His return to the lineup was very impressive. Now he does have a minor ankle injury, so we have to see how that develops. But he ran around on 86% of dropbacks, had a 31% target share, 38% air yard share, hit a 6.8 ADOT. He really does look like the wide receiver one here if he can get healthy and stay healthy. Juju Smith-Schuster had a nice game, staying on the positive side here. He ran around on 94% of dropbacks. He had a 29% target share, a 39% air yard share. On the season, though, he's still at 18.4% target per route run, 5.6 ADOT. This does look like a sell window in Dynasty to me. Still has a whopper of just 0.41, and he's running basically every possible route. So the downside would be if he stops running every single route, right? Then his targets per route run would really, really start to hurt him. Right now, he's kind of being buoyed by the fact that he's out there all the time. There's nowhere to go up. He can only go down. I'm not saying he will go down because I'm not sure who they would even play in the slot over him, but it does create, like if he were to tweak his ankle and they're just kind of nursing him a little bit, then he could potentially drop way off from here. So given that he has a yards per route run of 1.29, which is pretty ugly, given that he's not getting targeted at a high rate, even though he has a shallow ADOT, I do think this is a sell window. In redraft, where you don't have to deal with the fact that he's a free agent this offseason and maybe his value could really fall off a cliff. And if you just want to gamble that this is a sign that his value is turning around, I don't mind that. I do think Juju's a good player. I do think that, he should probably be getting more targets, especially he's getting rested right now during the week. Maybe he's dealing with a nagging injury that's hurting his ability, and maybe he's getting healthier and healthier, and he'll close the season out really strong. So you don't want to kind of panic sell him. But I did send some offers today, sending Juju, and I plan to continue doing that. Chase Claypool ran a route on 66% of dropbacks, while James Washington was at 24%. It's a really great sign for Claypool moving forward. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily think that this week was a great sign for Claypool. He had 1 for -2 this week, but the routes were really bullish. He ran around on 66% of dropbacks, James Washington at just at 24%. We were wondering how this was going to go. Was Claypool going to be able to play clearly ahead of Washington? Was it going to be a rotation? Well, he played clearly ahead of Washington. He wasn't a true full-time player. He wasn't up at 80+%. But now Deontay Johnson's banged up, so maybe now Johnson starts splitting a little bit more time with Washington, and Claypool does get up into that 80+% of routes. So this could be maybe the last time to buy Chase Claypool. Obviously, you're going to have to pay up to pry him away, but maybe, especially in like redraft, if someone got him pretty recently for cheap, picked him up off waivers potentially, then maybe you can pry him away and they can just feel like they're locking a profit. On the season, he has a yards per route run of 2.58, Claypool. He's a targets per route run of 18.6 with an ADOT of 12.9. So he's getting targeted pretty deep downfield and still getting targeted at a high rate. He has been very, very efficient on his targets. He's going to have monster weeks still. At tight end, Eric Ebron ran a route on 84% of dropbacks. That was a season high. He has had a 19% target per route run, which broke a streak that he had going of 3 straight games over 20% target per route run. But still, 19% is pretty solid and way up from where he was to start the season. So he's quietly developing now into a strong tight end option, looking very strong over his last 4 games. Eric Ebron, I think, definitely someone to start taking seriously at tight end. Moving to San Francisco, Jeff Wilson suffered an ankle injury, and he looks like he's going to miss at least 1 game, maybe more. Dominant, though, before going down. He had a very solid workload of 13.3 expected points. I think if he hadn't left due to an ankle injury, he probably would have added another 3-4 points there. and gotten to that, very strong running back one, not quite elite, but strong workload up into like the 16, 17 range. But man, he performed 18.7 points above expectations. He basically added an elite workload to, an almost elite workload. So it's pretty wild. And I think it's a testament to the system to some degree, which can just kind of make a star out of almost anyone, it seems like. It's also a testament to Jeff Wilson, who we thought was kind of like a goal line back more than anything else. And he showed that he's not. He's an NFL running back. This was a very impressive performance. It was also a perplexing performance because we thought that Jerick McKinnon would potentially return to a workhorse role like we saw him previously when Raheem Mostert was out, but he played only 18% of snaps. And apparently this was like a planned rest day. It was a secret planned rest day that Shanahan couldn't have told anyone about, even though it was planned the whole time. Super frustrating. I mean, it would have been nice to know that they didn't really plan on playing McKinnon. I wonder if it was completely planned or they realized they didn't need him and they sort of decided that if they, got up and didn't have to play McKinnon, they wouldn't. I'm not sure. But it's kind of interesting because now as they go forward, I wonder, if you were resting him, wouldn't you be resting him to use against the Seahawks? So now I'm wondering if maybe the place to go back to McKinnon here. But the other option with Wilson out would be Hasty. He played 23% of snaps and basically took over that Wilson role after Wilson went down. Hasty added 2.7 points to his 5.6 expected points workload. The other guy is Tevin Coleman. He has an outside chance, is the last that I had read on this, to return in week 8. But if we assume he doesn't go, then both Hasty and McKinnon, I think, look like pretty solid flex options. And then one of them will probably blow up and one of them will probably ruin your life. So I don't know which one. I do kind of lean McKinnon, like I said, but I don't know. I'm probably totally wrong because it's San Francisco. But one of them will be good. At wide receiver, Deebo Samuel, he looks likely to miss multiple weeks with a hamstring strain. Ran a route on 70% of dropbacks with an ADOT of -2. He also had 3 rushes. He's kind of getting used like almost like a running back or something. 20% target share, so he's getting used pretty heavily. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much of this shallow, almost running back style role gets taken on by Brandon Ayuk, who definitely does have the profile to do it. But Ayuk has been used in a completely different way this season. Ayuk has run a route on 81%, ran a route this week on 81% of dropbacks, and a 28% target share, a 66% air yard share. He had an 8 out of 15. So Samuel's at -2. Ayuk is at 15. I've talked about this before, where Samuel's being used behind the line of scrimmage and Ayuk's being used as a pure deep threat, even though they kind of profile pretty similarly in terms of the yards after the catch ability and that type of thing. But I think that they need Ayuk in this deep threat role more than they need him to be the guy that takes that shallow role. Ayuk had an elite whopper this week of 0.88, yards per target of 16.4. He was at just 3 last week. This was a spike week with yards per target. We know it can bounce all around, and it's especially going to be volatile when you see a guy with a deep ADOT. But it's another sign, I think, given that he was so good this week in this role, that he's probably going to stay in this role, even with Samuel out. He has consistently been in this role when Samuel's been back. I bet they use him on some of those rushes that they give Samuel, but I don't know if his targets change all that much. And if his targets don't change all that much, then maybe those running back-ish targets actually go to a running back, which again would probably help McKinnon. At tight end, George Kittle ran a route on 93% of dropbacks. He had a 28% target share, a 31% air yard share. He was targeted on 28% of his routes. He leads all tight ends in targets per out run this season. George Kittle is an absolute stud. He is right here on the chart where I've talked about DeAndre Hopkins, where I've talked about Keenan Allen, where I've talked about Stephon Diggs. I mean, this is the spot to be, and this is where we see George Kittle. He is, basically an elite wide receiver 1 with a tight end designation. In Seattle, Chris Carson will miss some time here with a mid-foot sprain. Knocked him out of the game in the second quarter. Carlos Hyde was kind of the lead back in the committee, but now he is questionable. for this week. So we'll have to see. Hyde played 49% of the snaps here. Travis Homer had 19%. DJ Dallas had 14%. Hyde had 13.4 expected points with 3.1 to Dallas, 1.4 to Homer. Keep an eye on how they expect the workload to break out between Dallas and Homer. If Hyde doesn't go, I think at this point we'll just need to kind of get more information. Bit too small of a sample to really say here because Hyde basically took over. And Hyde was the most efficient running back on the day with 3.2 points over expected. If he does play, if he ends up being, if he's off the injury report to close the week, then he looks like a pretty solid flex play for as long as Carson is out. At wide receiver, man, Tyler Lockett, 20 targets. He went 15 for 203, ran a route on 95% of dropbacks, 42% target share, 52% air yard share, a whopper of 0.99. All on an ADOT that wasn't even that deep of 11.7. Wild day for Lockett on a day where Devontae Adams just smashed Lockett, one-upped him. Pretty nuts. DK Metcalf, not a great day for him. Ran a route on 95% of dropbacks, but just a 10% target share, 17% air yard share, 15 ADOT. So he was kind of the true deep threat in this game. And a whopper of 0.27. Also had that awesome tackle that I'm sure you saw that saved a touchdown, although they did still lose the game. Lockett now on the season has the higher whopper of the two, but both these guys can explode on any given week. At this point, Tyler Lockett really does look like kind of peak Antonio Brown. Metcalf looks like an ascending Des Bryant, and they're both paired with maybe the best quarterback in the league, an up-tempo, pass-heavy offense. Like, this is awesome. I think Ben Gretz compared someone to Antonio Brown. I think it might have been Lockett like 4 weeks back, and that's why that's in my head. I don't know. But if so, credit to Ben for that. If not, I'm a genius. DK Metcalf and Des Bryant, I think, is maybe a Sean Siegel comp. I don't know. These comps get lodged in your head, and then they just stick with you. But, I mean, come on. He's Des Bryant. I think anyone can see that. At tight end, Will Dissly isn't the tight end one here, but I think he is making a push to be. Ran around on 51% of dropbacks this week coming out of the bye. And Greg Olsen saw his routes drop from 76% before the bye, in the game before the bye, to 63% this week. Olsen on the season only has a yards per route run of 0.93, which is really bad. Dissly is at 1.21, which isn't great either. But Olsen is an old guy who has lost it, and Dissly is a young guy who's coming back from injury. So it's possible that he works back, becomes more efficient, and now he's getting more routes run. I think that if we start to see that efficiency tick up a bit, it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Dissly already looks like kind of an interesting look ahead ad in FFPC to see if we see more routes run from him, to see if he really starts to take over this role. Because if he does, and if he becomes the tight end one in this offense, he's a much higher ceiling than Greg Olsen has been giving us so far. In Tampa Bay, good news, bad news for Ronald Jones this week. Here's the good news. It's more bad news than good news, but here's the good news. This looks like a 2 running back offense going forward. Arians yesterday called Fournette his nickel running back, which means he's going to have Fournette playing, and did have Fournette playing hurry up in obvious passing down situations, which had been LaShawn McCoy's role previously. If McCoy is no longer involved in the offense, that is good for everyone. That is good for everyone playing fantasy. That is good for everyone watching football. That is good for everyone associated with the Tampa Bay franchise. That is good, except for LaShawn McCoy. But everyone else is good for. Keyshawn Vaughn also played 0 offensive snaps. So this really was a 2 running back backfield. And if it is, then I think both these guys can have pretty strong value. The bad news is that Ronald Jones with Fournette in this nickelback role, of course Fournette is nickelback, right? Isn't that perfect? By the way, if you want someone to talk about Leonard Fournette and his skill set in a way that's not completely biased, I recommend Ian Harditz's breakdown of the games this week. He really, I think, kind of explains how bad of a pass catcher Fournette is and how stupid this role is for Fournette in a way that you might find believable coming from someone who isn't me. But I do find it frustrating that Fournette is in this role, given that he didn't really show any aptitude for it. Now, has Ronald Jones showed any aptitude for catching the ball this year? No, he is not. But he did actually show some last year, and he, drops we know are in a small sample, can happen over a small sample and aren't necessarily all that predictive. So I do find this pretty frustrating that Ronald Jones is used on early downs as a pass catcher. He is split out. He's split out. Like, it's not like they don't trust him to be involved as a pass catcher. And he's also been pass blocking pretty well. They trust him to do that on early downs. But as soon as it's third down, it's almost like there's a rule in place. And I guess there is, because this nickelback thing or whatever. What happens is Fournette comes in, and then it looks like Fournette is generally staying in for the next set of downs. So if Ronald Jones ever hits a third down, then he comes out, and then if they get the new first down, then Fournette tends to stay in for the next series. And so that can really hurt Jones, because if the conversion is to get down to the goal line, it's not like they're calling a timeout and bringing Jones in. And even after timeout, they might leave Fournette in. So, if Jones gets them down to the goal line on first or second down, or if they get down there on converting a new first down on second down when Jones is already in, Jones will stay in. And that's what happened. Jones got a touchdown in this game because he happened to be in for that play. But he's at risk. It's fragile. It's very fragile for Jones. And he needs to be in good game scripts where they're going to be converting a lot of their first and second downs into new first downs, and where they're trying to really run the ball down people's throats. In games where it's kind of more of a shootout style, then, it pains me to say this, but Fournette is actually looking like he has some pretty strong value, because, in this game, he played 56% of the snaps. He had a borderline elite workload of 18.4 expected points. Jones played 43% of the snaps. He had a decent workload of 12.5 points. Fournette did leave 2.7 points on the field here. Rojo left 1.9 on the field. Neither actually played that well. But, in these shootout type of scripts, then we can see Fournette in on any kind of hurry up stuff, any type of comeback mode stuff. You're probably seeing Fournette, and anytime they get to third down, Fournette is coming in. So, I'm going to be very cognizant of this when deciding whether or not to start Ronald Jones, because or play Ronald Jones in DFS or anything, because if it looks like there's the potential for that type of script, then he has the potential to fail if they're going to continue using him like this. And I think they probably will, because he was not being used on third downs before Fournette took over this role. The good news is, though, if they're in like a potential spot to roll like they are this week against the Giants, then not having LaShawn McCoy get mixed in and not having Keyshawn Vaughn get mixed in is actually very bullish for Ronald Jones. And Fournette can kind of get his while taking those guys' role instead of really eating into Ronald Jones's early down role. They get the Giants in their next game, and I think Rojo actually does set up for a smash spot there if they get the right game script. All right, enough about Ronald Jones. Moving to the wide receivers, Chris Godwin just had surgery on his fractured index finger. He's going to miss some time. Antonio Brown officially signed his one-year deal. Godwin ran a route on 87% of dropbacks in this game and had a 22% target share and 15% of air yards. Very efficient game, 2.26 yards per route run. I think he's going to be fine when he gets back, although obviously we have to see what's going to happen with Brown. He's a bit of a wild card. If he turns this into kind of a 4 wide receiver rotation, it's going to be pretty rough for everybody. Mike Evans can't really afford that type of thing because he's already having super frustrating games. He ran a route on 96% of dropbacks, just a 5% target share, a 7% air yard share. He had an 8 out of 14, which I think helps explain that, because when Brady went deep this week, it was to Scotty Miller, who was also running deep with an 8 out of 16.8, but Miller had a 22% target share, a 37% air yard share. He had a wide receiver 1 level whopper this week of 0.59, and he was out there on 71% of dropbacks. I've been thinking of this offense. I've used this analogy before, but it's really started to become pretty similar to the 2014 Arizona Cardinals offense, where that was John Brown's rookie year. It was, Bruce Arians' offense, and you've got Larry Fitzgerald, who was a little dusty, but not fully dusty. And then you had Michael Floyd. And I think we can kind of think of this like Miller, Scotty Miller, very small wide receiver, speed wide receiver, deep threat, operating in that John Brown role. That is like a 1-for-1 to me. And then Chris Godwin, kind of a much less dusty version of an already somewhat dusty Larry Fitzgerald, the 2014 version of Larry Fitzgerald, in that slot role, that consistent, efficient, but not seeing truly elite volume. And then you've got Mike Evans operating as Michael Floyd, who's going to be pretty frustrating, but capable of huge weeks. So that's kind of where I see it right now. But the problem is now you have Antonio Brown joining the mix. Does Brown take over the Scotty Miller role long-term? That's kind of what I'm expecting, but we'll have to see. For now, he's probably just going to slot right into the Godwin role. That's going to be easy enough. But when Godwin comes back, I don't know if they phase out Scotty Miller entirely. And if they don't, it could be pretty gross. It could be especially gross because all of a sudden Rob Gronkowski is maybe not a cloud of dust after all. He ran a route on 60% of dropbacks. He had 20% target share and 26% air yard share. The thing that's interesting is that his ADOT was really deep for a tight end, 13.1 ADOT. And then he had a 27% targets per out run, which is very strong for a tight end and extremely strong for that 13.1 ADOT. On the season now, he has a 20% targets per out run. And really the only thing that's holding him back from being like an elite option at the tight end position, especially this year, is that he's not out there all the time. He ran a route on 67% of dropbacks this week. If he gets up into that 70+% range and he's keeping a 20% plus target per route run, I mean, all of a sudden, Rob Gronkowski is looking like an elite tight end option. I guess we shouldn't be shocked that it took him like 7 weeks to kind of work back into form and that he did have something left. I think I'll take the L. I was kind of quick to write him off. He's dusty. He's going to be nothing. And it did look like he was dust. He looked bad, but he spent his off year like wrestling and stuff. Like he lost a ton of weight, spent the year wrestling, but he is good at football. And it took him like almost half a season to kind of work back into shape. I don't know. I mean, he as well is going to be tough to count on if Brown, doesn't flame out immediately and is earning a bunch of targets. So this is all kind of thrown up in the air now. This whole offense is going to be really tough to predict. Lots of moving parts, lots of changing roles. All right, moving to the Titans. Derrick Henry played 74% of snaps here. He had a 19.6 expected point workload, left 4.4 points on the field in a tough matchup, but impressive that he had a workload this big against the Steelers. Jeremy McNichols played 26% of snaps, but just had half a point in expected workload. Remains a solid stash with Evans on IR, but no real standalone value, even though he did have a little bit of run the week before. At wide receiver, A.J. Brown ran a route on 91% of dropbacks, had a 27% target share, 36% air yard share, an 11.2 ADOT, and a 0.66 Whopper. This was all great kind of wide receiver one level stuff. But interestingly, he was actually bested by Corey Davis. He ran a route on 94% of dropbacks. He had a 33% target share, 35% air yard share is the only thing he didn't beat Brown in, slightly below him in air yard share, but a 0.75 Whopper, which is like a true number one wide receiver, kind of elite Whopper. This should have been a Corey Davis week, according to underlying stats, but it's Corey Davis. So he had a 3.5 yards per target, and it's A.J. Brown. So he had a 25.5 yards per target. 3.5 to 25.5. That's the difference here. You can't tell me some of that isn't due to the talent here. A.J. Brown on the season has a truly elite yards per route run of 2.5. And remember, with A.J. Brown, one of the key reasons that we were so excited about him entering the season is that he led all rookies last year in yards per out run with 2.67. He's now setting up to be above 2 again, which, doubling up above 2 to start your career is just super, super bullish. He is profiling like a future superstar, and not even future. He's a superstar already, and looks like he's going to continue to be a superstar as we move forward. Really excited about this offense being more fast-paced than we thought, being willing to pass more than we thought it would be. So far, really bullish for A.J. Brown, even though he started the season a bit slow. Davis, he actually hasn't been bad this year, even though this week he had that 3.5 yards per target. But on the season, he has a yards per route run of 1.87. And I think he should bounce back nicely from this really bad and efficient game. On the season, he has a 0.52 Whopper, which is also pretty good. So Davis kind of quietly is someone that I think probably matters for fantasy. And, if he continues getting this decent volume, decent to good volume, and isn't playing terribly, I think he'll have some good weeks. I mean, certainly this could have been a massive week for him. It just didn't happen on the per target efficiency. Jonnu Smith in this game did not run a full slate of routes. I think this was likely due to his health. He had 41%. He was out there on 41% of dropbacks. That's tied with Anthony Firkser. Again, I think he takes his role back from Firkser once he's fully healthy. Jonnu Smith had a 21% target per route run in this game. It does look like a buying opportunity to me for Jonnu on the season. He has a target per route run of 27.4%, a yards per route run of 2.15. He's an elite option when healthy, unless you're really concerned, a lot more concerned than I am about what Firkser is going to take from him. Then I think this is a buying window for Jonnu. Moving to our last team, the Washington football team. I don't know. I've talked a few times, right? Josh Jacobs, why does he not get used as a receiver in obvious receiving situations? Why does Ronald Jones get pigeonholed? I guess that one's a little more obvious since he had all those drops. But why does Antonio, we can all agree on this one, right? Why is Antonio Gibson not being used as a receiver? This is frustrating. Antonio Gibson is a game script dependent running back for some reason, even though he's a converted wide receiver. In this game, he had 20 carries for 128 yards and a touchdown. He only had one target, though. And according to Hayden Winks' work, he had 0 third down or hurry up opportunities. 0. I don't get it. I honestly don't get it. He had only 12.6 expected points, which is a solid workload. Lower than you'd think, though, given the output of 20 for 128 and 1. He only played 48% of snaps. This was reduced because Peyton Barber closed out the game in garbage time. Barber had 33% of snaps. So maybe we shouldn't get too worried about the snaps. But J.D. McKissick played 49% of snaps. That does worry me. And he had 2 targets. I think that in game scripts that are more competitive, then McKissick is gonna break our hearts as Gibson owners, and I don't really understand why that should be the case. I think, normally I don't want to be betting on the situation to change. I don't want to be betting on the guy who's been pigeonholed to stop getting pigeonholed. But I think long term, I am going to bet on that. I am going to bet on Gibson to eventually take back some of this pass catching role from McKissick, given that he's a converted wide receiver. Also, given what we've seen from Ron Rivera, what we've seen from Scott Turner, that they are willing to use a guy like Christian McCaffrey to be an every down workhorse. They're not afraid to have a guy like that. And I think that they're probably just developing Gibson. And that's why we're seeing this, that he's not somehow gotten pigeonholed as an early down running back, as a converted wide receiver, but they're bringing him along. So he is someone. I sent out a trade for him earlier today in Dynasty. I am going to try to get more shares of him. I am ready and willing to be very frustrated with him in the short term as he continues to be game script dependent. But after a week 8 bye, they also get the Giants. So even if he is game script dependent, he does set up here for a smash game potentially in his very next game. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if this season, maybe we'll get that David Johnson run. Maybe they'll just unleash him for like the playoffs, and we'll get that 4. Remember when David Johnson was a rookie and he just exploded over the last 4 games of his rookie season? I think that's in play for Gibson. But we'll have to see. At wide receiver, Terry McLaurin, look at him over here. This is the Devontae Adams range, right? He had 52% target share this week, 57% area share, target per route run of 41%, an ADOT of 10.2. He is not simply a deep threat. An ADOT of 10.2 is in that primary wide receiver range. He ran around 96% of dropbacks. He is just a classic alpha receiver. Imagine this dude with a good quarterback next year. he is a prime dynasty target. He is a guy that if anyone is like frustrated and just thinking that this is going to be life with Terry McLaurin, not if they get a good quarterback. They're not a very good team. I mean, I guess they could make the playoffs because of how bad their division is, and that would kind of ruin everything. But I mean, if assuming that doesn't happen and they can get a quarterback in here, I think they have everything else. I like the system that he's in. I like that this offense can be up tempo. It's not like Washington was last year where they're just, under Bill Callahan, they just wanted to end the game as quickly as possible. They're willing to air it out. They're willing to play a bit faster than you'd think for a bad team. So it's all kind of there for McLaurin. It just comes down to whether or not they find a quarterback. And for Dynasty, he does look like a dude who could just emerge as like a true premium asset if he gets that quarterback play increased. Cam Sims here, some of the other pieces. He ran a route on 89% of dropbacks, but had just one target. Dontrell Inman wasn't targeted in this game on 12 routes. Really, all the volume went to McLaurin through the air, other than the tight end. Logan Thomas ran a route on 68% of dropbacks and had a 21% target per route run. It was a nice spike week game for him. I mentioned that as a possibility last week. I'm not really buying it, though, as something to, incorporate into our mental projections for him going forward. On the season, he has a terrible yards per route run of 0.88. He has a target per route run of just 15.6 going forward. So I'm happy we got the spike game. Maybe we get another one in that Giants game. So, not someone that you have to necessarily drop during the bye week or anything. But am I buying into Logan Thomas as a reliable tight end option? No, I'm definitely not. I still think that he's going to be pretty frustrating more often than not. All right, this was like the longest one ever. I don't know. I tried to be quick. I was talking so quick I was stumbling over my words, but somehow I went long. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, please go to YouTube. Please subscribe. We're trying to build up the channel. If you're watching this, it's right there. Hit the button. Subscribe to us, please. And, make sure to check us out on Ship Chasing this week. We're going to have Crack Rock on, who we co-drafted one of our main events with. He's like a high-stakes grinder who got us to take the big dog, and our team is absolutely smashing right now. So it's kind of a fun team that has combinations of like guys that he wanted, guys that we want. And it's our best team. And I think it's his best team. So anyway, we're going to have him on, talk about that. And you can check that out on Wednesday at 9:15. And until then, I will see you later. Good luck with your waivers this week.